Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I woke up to cold air hitting my face. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the kind of cold from a draft or breeze, but like the temperature around me had dropped suddenly. I was camping alone, up near Lake Shasta on the north side where there aren't any official sites. Just forest and steep hills and the occasional logging road that gets washed out after winter. I'd pitched my tent at the base of a slope maybe 100 yards from the shoreline. It was late September, clear and dry during the day, but it got chilly at night. I'd made a small fire, cooked a tin of chili, and crashed around 10. Slept hard. No drinks, no drugs, nothing weird. It was 3:14 a.m. when I sat up. I remember that exactly because my watch was still on my wrist, and I looked at it right away. The tent flap was wide open, zipper pulled halfway down. That stopped me cold. I always zip the tent fully. Always. It's habit, keeps the bugs out, keeps the heat in. I don't leave it open, even when I get up to pee. At first, I thought maybe I'd unzipped it in my sleep. I've never done that before, but I guess anything's possible. But then I saw my gear. Everything electronic, my phone, GPS, headlamp, even my spare battery pack, was outside the tent, arranged in a straight line on the pine needles. About 6 feet out, just beyond the lip of the rainfly. All lined up perfectly, with a few inches between each. Like someone had taken the time to place them that way. I stared at them for a long time. None of them were turned on. My phone was powered off completely, which I never do. It stays in airplane mode when I'm out there. The GPS was off too. The headlamp, I'd left that inside, zipped into the tent's gear pocket, was sitting with the rest, bulb facing up. It didn't feel like a prank. No one else was out there. I hadn't seen a soul since I parked 2 days earlier and hiked in. The area is pretty remote, and I know the trails. If someone had come into my sight, I would have heard them. But I hadn't. There was no noise, no footprints around the tent. The pine needles looked undisturbed except for where I'd walked the night before. I checked my pockets. Wallet, knife, keys, all there. I should have packed up right then, but I didn't. I told myself maybe I'd had some kind of episode. Maybe I got up half asleep, moved my stuff, forgot. That made less and less sense the longer I sat there, but I held on to it. I gathered everything up and did a quick sweep around the tent. Nothing else seemed touched. I zipped the flap tight again, locked it with a little clip I keep for peace of mind, and laid back down. I didn't sleep after that, just listened. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no bugs, no rustling. It was like everything had shut off. Around 4:30, I finally started to drift, not asleep exactly, but that heavy, half-conscious kind of rest. I noticed it's a soft clicking sound. Very faint, regular, like two pieces of plastic tapping together. It was coming from behind the tent on the uphill side. I froze. The clicks would go for a few seconds, stop, then start again. Always the same rhythm. Click, click, pause, click, click. I didn't unzip the tent. I just lay there, breathing slow, trying to decide if it was an animal or branches or something else. It went on for maybe 5 minutes. Then stopped completely. I waited another 10, then sat up and turned on the headlamp. Dead. Battery drained. That thing was fully charged the day before, and I hadn't even used it yet. I tried my GPS next. Nothing. My phone powered on, but the screen was glitching, flickering and jumping between apps like it was being remotely accessed. Then it shut down on its own and wouldn't turn back on. Sunrise couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I got out of the tent and checked the slope behind me. There were marks in the dirt. Not footprints exactly, more like depressions spaced a few feet apart, leading in a zigzag down from the trees toward my tent and stopping just short of the rainfly. The dirt was dry and loose, but whatever had made those impressions had been heavy enough to leave an indent, then disappear. I walked out to the lake, trying to clear my head, and when I turned back toward the camp, I saw a shape in the trees, just standing there, still. It was far, maybe 50 yards, and mostly behind a trunk, but I could see part of a shoulder, maybe a head. I called out. No response. When I stepped toward it, it moved, quick and silent, deeper into the woods, gone in seconds. I didn't chase it. I packed everything up fast, shoved gear into my pack without folding or wrapping anything. I was on the trail within 10 minutes, hiked all the way back to the truck in under 4 hours. When I finally had signal again, my phone still wouldn't boot. I tried charging it from the car. Nothing. I had to get a new one a week later. The repair guy couldn't recover anything. Said the hardware was corrupted. Same with the GPS. Never powered on again. The headlamp was the only one that worked after a battery change, but the bulb flickered when I turned it on, like it was struggling to stay lit. I haven't camped solo since. I still go out sometimes, but always with friends. I still bring my gear, still zip the tent tight, but every now and then I wake up in the dark and check to make sure everything's still inside. Still zipped, still there. The first time I noticed it, I thought the watch was just broken. I'd had it for years, an old silver Citizen with a black leather band. It was my dad's before he passed, and I wore it more out of habit than anything. I still checked my phone for the time like everyone else, but I liked having it on my wrist. It ticked quietly and always ran a little fast, never late. I was driving back from Lincoln to my place in Grand Island. That stretch of Highway 34 between Seward and Aurora, it's pretty dull. Just flat fields and irrigation rigs with the occasional barn or grain silo breaking up the horizon. It was a Thursday, late afternoon, and I had the windows cracked because the AC in my car doesn't kick in until you've been driving a while. Sun was low behind me, throwing long shadows over the fields. Somewhere between York and Hampton, I glanced at my watch. It said 3:47. I remember that because it felt early. I thought I'd been driving longer than that. But when I looked at the dashboard clock, it said 4:12. My phone agreed. I figured I'd bump the crown or something and reset it without noticing. When I got home, I wound it again and set it to match my phone. Didn't think much of it. The next week, I drove the same route for a follow-up meeting. It was a similar time of day, maybe an hour later. But this time I checked the watch before I hit the long stretch outside York. It said 4:39. I kept my eyes on the road, didn't touch the watch, didn't mess with the buttons or anything. 20 minutes later, just past the exit for Hampton, I looked again, 4:26. I actually laughed, thought I was losing it, pulled over at the Ampride and took the watch off. It was ticking. The second hand was moving counterclockwise, like smoothly, not jerking or glitching, just going the wrong way. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes, then it stopped entirely. No movement. Completely still. I shook it, tapped the glass, nothing. Back in the car, I tossed it into the cup holder and didn't look at it again until I got to the hotel in Lincoln. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed the ticking sound again. I picked it up. The second hand was moving forward. Time was right again, only a couple minutes off from my phone. That's when it really sank in. It wasn't broken. It was only doing that on the highway, specifically that stretch between York and Hampton, maybe further. I wasn't sure yet. Over the next few weeks, I tried it a few more times. Same result, every single time. I'd checked the time before I got near York. Watch was fine. The moment I hit that dead straight part of the drive with nothing but cornfields on either side, the second hand would start creeping backward. It would lose time slowly at first, then more aggressively the longer I stayed on that stretch. The minute hand would shift too, but lag behind. I timed it once, about 5 minutes of reverse time for every 15 I spent in that area. I brought it up to a guy I work with, Scott. He's into mechanical stuff, does ham radio, that kind of thing. He looked at the watch, opened the case, poked around, said everything looked clean. I didn't tell him the whole story, just that it was acting weird when I drive. He said sometimes magnetism can throw off older movements, especially in places with underground lines or transformers. So I started paying attention to what was around me on that road. There's no big substations, no cell towers that I could see, no wind farms, no weird military fences, just crops and the occasional crumbling farmhouse way off in the distance. I drove it once at night just to see if anything looked different. It didn't, except it felt worse in the dark, harder to breathe, maybe, harder to focus. But that might have been in my head. I stopped wearing the watch for a bit, left it on the kitchen counter, Then one afternoon, I decided to try something else. I brought a second watch, one of those cheap digital ones you get at Walgreens. Put fresh batteries in it that morning. Wore the analog on my left wrist, the digital on my right. Same result. As soon as I crossed that invisible line, somewhere around Road T, just past York, the analog started winding backward. The digital one didn't change, but it flickered. That's the only way I can describe it. Every few seconds, the display would dim and glitch like an old calculator when the battery's dying. Once I left both on the passenger seat while I drove and recorded it on my phone. I propped the phone up on the dash and let it roll, thinking I'd finally get proof. But when I played it back later, the watches looked totally normal. No reversed motion, no flickering, just a regular drive with two still watches. I watched it 4 times in a row. Nothing. I started getting more anxious about the route. Every time I had to make that trip, I'd feel it building before I even left the house. This sort of pressure in my ears, like before a storm. Once I started seeing what time it should have been versus what the watch said, I got this horrible looping feeling. Like maybe it wasn't just the watch going backward. Maybe I was, too, in some tiny way. There was one afternoon in early June that really messed with me. It was hot, no clouds, pavement shimmering like water. I'd left a meeting in Lincoln early and was driving home a little before 3. I checked the watch when I passed the York Water Tower, 2:48. 15 minutes later, I looked again, 2:42. I blinked and looked at the dashboard. That one said 3:03. But I didn't remember those last 15 minutes. It felt like I'd blinked and gone backward. I didn't fall asleep. I wasn't tired. Just gone. I tried retracing the drive in my head and it felt blank, just static, like my brain had muted that part. I pulled over, got out, and sat on the hood. The air was thick with bugs. I checked my phone, took a few pictures of the fields. Nothing weird showed up. No glitches, no filters, just farmland. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off out there. Like I wasn't supposed to notice that patch of road. Like maybe it didn't want me remembering it. That was the last time I wore the watch. It's still on my dresser, ticking along like normal. I wind it once a week out of habit, but I don't wear it, and I don't drive that way anymore either. I take the interstate even if it adds 40 minutes. It's worth it. I'd rather deal with traffic and truckers than whatever's happening out there. I don't know what it is. I don't want to. I went out just before sunrise to check the east pasture like I usually do. This was late March, cold mornings, but the frost had mostly lifted by the time I got out there. Still had to wear my canvas jacket, though. Ground was stiff underfoot, sky that kind of pale gray blue it gets before the sun actually breaks over the ridge. I live on about 60 acres east of Buffalo, Wyoming. Nothing fancy. Just me, the horses and the herd, 18 head of Black Angus plus a bull. Most of the time it's quiet. You get used to the wind, the coyotes, the weird thumps in the barn at night. But that morning, anyway, I was riding out with my dog, Piper, an old brindle mutt, half blue heeler, half question mark. She stays close to the saddle, smart dog, never chases the cows or spooks them. About 20 minutes in, just as we crested the little rise by the windbreak, I saw one of the cows standing off from the rest of the herd. About 50 yards out, near the far fence line, alone, facing straight up. At first I figured she was just watching something, hawk, drone, maybe a low-flying plane. But then I noticed she wasn't blinking, just standing there, still as a post. I nudged the mare forward and we got close enough for me to recognize her. It was Fern, one of the older girls, 12 years old, has this little notch in her left ear from a gate accident back in 18. She didn't move when I got within 20 feet, didn't twitch her ears, didn't flick her tail, just stood there, head tilted back, neck stretched up like she was craning to see something above her. I dismounted, told Piper to stay back, and walked up real slow. I figured maybe she was sick, rabies, tetanus, something neurological. I said her name out loud just to see if she'd respond. Fern. Nothing. I touched her shoulder. Still nothing. Her eyes were wide open, glassy, locked straight up at the sky. I waved a hand in front of her face. No blink, no flinch. She wasn't paralyzed or frozen. I could feel her breathing, slow and steady. Her muscles weren't tense. She was just locked in. I looked up, thinking maybe I'd see what had her so fixated. There was nothing there. just sky. No clouds, no plane trails, no birds, dead still. I stood there a minute, trying to figure out what to do. I've dealt with sick cattle, injured cattle, even a case of bloat that damn near killed a steer. But this was different. She wasn't in pain. She wasn't panicked. She just wasn't there. Piper started whining behind me. She was pacing in tight little circles, tail low, nose to the ground, like she was tracking something. But there was nothing. No scent, no tracks. Then the rest of the cows started bawling. I turned around and saw the herd bunched up on the opposite side of the pasture, all facing the same direction. South, toward the old cottonwood grove by the creek. I didn't see anything at first, but Piper wouldn't stop pacing and the cows wouldn't shut up. Then I heard this low, vibrating hum, barely audible, more like a pressure in my chest than a sound. I led Fern by the halter. She moved stiffly, like she didn't really know she was walking, and tied her to the fence post so she wouldn't wander. The hum stopped as soon as I touched the gate. Everything went quiet again. No wind, no cows. Piper froze, ears straight up, eyes locked on the cottonwoods. I scanned the tree line. Thought maybe someone was out there, trespassers, hunters, maybe even drones again. But there was nothing. Just trees, still as death. I walked Fern back to the barn later that morning. She didn't seem scared or hurt, just tired. Like she'd run 10 miles in her head. She ate, drank, acted normal the rest of the day. But her eyes never quite went back to normal. She stopped blinking as often, kept turning her head to the sky like she was waiting for something to come back. That night, I left Piper in the house. She refused to go out again. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee around 10 p.m., just watching the horizon. There was a light, faint and high up, moving in a slow circle, not flashing, just gliding. It faded after a few minutes, and I didn't see it again. 2 mornings later, I found a patch of scorched grass near the fence where Fern had been. Not burned, exactly, just dried and colorless, like it'd been microwaved. The grass around it was untouched. She never stood in that corner again. Neither did any of the others. We were 3 days into a week-long hiking trip in the Wallowa Mountains when it happened. Me, my sister Lee, her husband Dan, and my nephew Milo, who just turned 11. We'd taken the West Fork Trail into the Eagle Cap Wilderness, about as remote as you can get in northeastern Oregon without a helicopter. We started from the trailhead near Lostine and camped at Mirror Lake the second night. On the third morning, we packed up early to hike over Glacier Pass and drop down toward Moccasin Lake, where we'd planned to set up for a couple days of fishing. The weather was good, cool but clear, with that dry alpine air that smells like pine needles and sun-baked rock. Nothing felt off that morning. No weird vibes or anything like that. We'd made it a couple miles past the pass when the humming started. That's the first thing I remember, just this low, weird vibration under everything. It wasn't loud exactly, it was more like pressure, like when you stand too close to a big subwoofer, but you don't hear it so much as feel it in your chest. I was walking in front, Lee behind me, then Dan and Milo. I stopped because I thought I was about to be sick. Not dizzy, not nauseous. Just this sudden, overwhelming tightness in my chest and stomach, like I'd swallowed something heavy. Lee said, "Are you okay?" and then stopped mid-sentence and put a hand on her neck like she couldn't swallow. Dan called out from the back, "Do you guys feel that?" And Milo said, "It's buzzing," and his voice cracked a little, like he was scared. It wasn't just sound, it felt like it was in the ground too. The rocks underfoot had this faint tremble to them. We all just stood there, looking around, trying to spot a helicopter or some kind of machinery, but there was nothing. No wind, no trees moving, no birds. Just us on a rocky switchback about 8,000 feet up, in total silence except for that vibration. Lee dug her phone out of her pack to check the GPS. We'd been using Gaia to track our location, but the screen was black. Not off, just black, like the backlight was on, but nothing else was working. I tried mine, same thing. Dan had his Garmin watch, GPS, compass, all that, and it wouldn't load the map screen, just froze on the splash screen. He tapped it a couple times and said, "It's dead, it just locked up." We decided to get moving again, but Milo started crying. Not loudly, just these little hiccuping sobs like he was embarrassed but couldn't help it. He said his teeth hurt. His teeth. Dan picked him up and started walking fast, and we all followed. We didn't talk about where we were going, we just didn't want to be there anymore. The humming followed us for maybe another quarter mile. It didn't change in volume or direction, it just stayed this heavy presence around us. I kept checking behind us like I was expecting to see a landslide coming down the ridge or a drone or something, but there was nothing. Then, all at once, it stopped. I don't mean it faded out. I mean 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, like flipping a switch. And when it did, every single sound came rushing back in. Birds, wind, the creak of Dan's boots. Milo stopped crying and asked if we'd just gone deaf and then undeaf, which sounds dumb, but made a weird kind of sense in the moment. We all pulled out our phones again. Nothing. No GPS, no compass, no cell signal, no offline maps. Mine rebooted itself while I was holding it, but still wouldn't open anything. We stood there in this little clearing, surrounded by boulders and low scrub, and just stared at our gear like we were trying to will it back to life. Then, 15 minutes later, almost to the second, I swear, everything came back. Lee's phone pinged with a text from her coworker. My compass flipped on. Dan's Garmin buzzed on his wrist. It was like someone had hit the power button on the whole forest and then turned it back on. We sat down and had some water. None of us said much. Milo kept asking if we could go home, and Lee said soon, and then looked at Dan like, what the hell was that? Later that day, we made it to Moccasin Lake and set up camp. We didn't mention what happened until that night, around the fire. No one had an explanation. No weather balloons, no equipment. No, it's just the wind in the rocks. We'd all heard it, felt it. I tried checking news stories when we got home the next week, anything about seismic activity or military drills in that part of Oregon. Nothing. I emailed the Forest Service to ask if they'd had reports of strange noises near Glacier Pass. They replied, not that we're aware of, and sent a link to a wildlife sighting page. Milo doesn't talk about it anymore. Last I heard, he tells people he got altitude sickness on the trip. Maybe that's easier to explain. I saw them on a Tuesday morning, early spring, driving east on Route 212 just outside Catawba. That stretch of road cuts through low pasture land, so you can see a long way in every direction once the sun starts coming up. I leave the house around 5:15 most days, give or take, just early enough that it's still dark, but with the horizon starting to lighten. That morning was clear, cold, around 40, and the fields had that silver look from frost. I had the heat cranked in the car and one hand wrapped around my travel mug, just like always. I was maybe 10 minutes into the drive past the last grouping of houses when I noticed the lights. 3 of them. Bright white. They weren't moving. Just hanging in the sky above the tree line on the left side of the road. Perfectly spaced, like someone had stuck 3 dots on a ruler and tilted it slightly. At first I thought it was a tower. There's a wind farm about 30 miles out, but that's nowhere near this stretch. Then I thought maybe a plane, but they weren't blinking, and they weren't moving. I slowed down, pulled to the gravel shoulder, and turned down the radio. The lights didn't shift. They didn't even flicker. I watched them for about 30 seconds, then reached for my phone. I leaned across the passenger seat to get a better angle through the windshield and recorded maybe 10 seconds of video. It was weird, but I figured I'd look at it later, see if I was just catching a weird reflection or something. I kept driving, had to get to the plant by 6, checked the mirror a few times, and the lights were still there for another mile or so, then gone. Didn't think much of it until break. Around 9:30, I stepped outside and pulled up the video. Nothing, just the empty sky. The trees were there, the same stretch of road, the glow on the horizon from the sunrise, but no lights. I scrubbed through the clip twice, thought maybe I'd been pointing too low, but I'd aimed right at them. I remember lining them up with the top corner of the windshield. I remember zooming slightly. There was no blur, no pixelation. It was just like they hadn't been there at all. I figured maybe I was remembering it wrong. Maybe I'd imagined it, except when I zoomed in on one frame, I could see the reflection of 3 bright dots on the hood of my car. That's what got me. The lights weren't in the sky in the video, but their reflections were still visible on the metal. Later that day, I told Tony, the guy I carpool with sometimes. He said maybe it was headlights from a hill or an aerial refueling op, something mundane. I said sure, yeah, probably. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Next morning, same route, same time. I had my phone ready, just in case. Nothing. Clear sky. No lights. On Thursday, they were back. Same place in the sky, same position. 3 dots, slightly tilted. I pulled over again, tried recording from 2 angles, through the windshield, then out the driver's side window. I even stepped out of the car for a few seconds. There was no sound, no engine hum, no chopper blades, no wind. Just the soft hiss of the tires cooling and a few birds off in the trees. Again, they didn't move. They didn't fade or shift or react. I watched them until I was almost late. Back at work, I checked both videos. Same thing, no lights. The trees, the early dawn glow, even the little smudge of pollen on the windshield showed up clearly. But no lights. One clip, again, had the faintest dot-shaped glints reflecting on the car hood. Not as clear as before, but they were there. I stopped showing people after that. No one really cared, and I didn't feel like being the guy chasing ghosts on his morning commute. But I kept watching. Over the next 3 weeks, I saw them 5 more times. Never on consecutive days. Never in bad weather. Always right before sunrise. Always in the same spot. I tried filming every angle I could think of. Dash cam, rear view mirror, even stuck my phone out the window once, half frozen. Every video came back clean, like the sky had been empty the whole time. But my eyes said otherwise. And then there was the night I woke up at 2 a.m. with my phone light on. Just the lock screen. Not a notification or call. I thought maybe I'd rolled over onto it, but it was sitting on the dresser across the room. The next morning, the phone was dead. Wouldn't charge. I had to swap out the battery at a repair place downtown. When I finally got it working again, the first 2 videos I took of the lights were gone. Just those 2. The rest of my photos were still there. Even older stuff. Vacations, random screenshots, dog pictures, all intact. Just those 2 clips, missing like they'd never existed. On April 17th, I tried bringing my old Canon, one of those compact digital cameras I hadn't used in years. Charged it overnight, formatted the card. When I saw the lights, I pulled over and took 3 stills and a short video. All 3 photos came out black. Just solid black squares, like the shutter hadn't opened. The video file wouldn't play at all. It showed up on the card, had a timestamp and file size, but nothing would open it. Not on the camera, not on my laptop. That was the last time I saw them. I kept checking for the next 2 months. Every day, same route, same time. Nothing. Just morning frost and sunrises, and the same cracked stretch of asphalt I'd driven 100 times. I deleted the videos eventually, the ones that didn't show anything. I figured if I ever looked too closely, tried to enhance or clean up the reflections, I'd just be chasing shadows. And the more I thought about it, the more I didn't want to know if something was buried in those pixels. I stopped pulling over, stopped checking the sky. It's better that way. I get to work on time now. We were up at Crooked Hollow, this open patch of pasture behind Will's uncle's place, about 10 miles outside Lander. Nowhere special, just a big private field tucked between low hills and some scattered cottonwoods. Will's uncle lets us use it for stuff like this, bonfires, beers, whatever, so long as we don't leave trash or get loud. It was a dry night, early October, not too cold yet. Clear sky, no clouds, stars out in full. You could see the Milky Way like a brushstroke across the whole sky. I remember that part clearly. It was one of those nights where you feel small in a good way. It was me, Will, his girlfriend Maya, and my buddy Carter. We'd all driven up in Will's truck around 9, parked by the edge of the field, and laid out some sleeping bags and tarps to lie back on. Maya brought one of those little Bluetooth speakers, and we listened to music for a while. Low stuff, ambient, nothing distracting, just staring up, pointing out constellations when we could actually remember names. We weren't drunk or high or anything. I want to say that early on because people always assume that. We had a few beers, yeah, but nobody was buzzed. It was too quiet for that. Things started feeling weird around midnight. Not bad, just quiet in a way that didn't feel right. Like the air went still, no wind, no bugs. The trees didn't rustle, and there was this tension in the silence, like the kind you get before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was totally clear. I sat up and noticed Carter was already looking around. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Will nodded, but didn't say anything. Maya was still lying back, eyes closed. She hadn't said much for a while. We all looked up again, and that's when we saw them. At first I thought it was just a satellite, one of those bright ones you catch gliding across the sky. But then a second one appeared. Then a third, all spaced perfectly, like they were connected by invisible lines. Then a fourth, and they started moving together. Not fast, just shifting. They weren't blinking, no red or green markers like a plane, just solid white lights, soft around the edges, and totally silent. They started rotating, that's the only word I can think of. The four lights moved in a square, then the square tilted like it was rolling over in the air. But it wasn't tumbling. Every move was smooth and perfectly controlled, like water moving in a pattern. The whole shape just turned itself inside out, like origami folding in the air, and became a triangle. Then a line. Carter whispered, "That's not drones." And he was right. Drones buzz. These didn't make a sound, not even wind displacement. And the way they moved together was too fluid. It wasn't like separate objects coordinating. It was like one thing with multiple points of light. Then more lights appeared. Fainter, farther back. 8 or 9 of them in a longer formation, like a kind of arc. They stayed low on the horizon for a minute before vanishing, not by flying away, but just by dimming out one by one, like someone pulling a dimmer switch. None of us said anything for a long time. Then Maya sat up. She looked around like she'd just woken up, confused and a little annoyed. She asked if we were leaving soon. Carter turned to her and said, "Did you not see that?" She just stared at him. "See what?" She hadn't seen the lights. She didn't know what time it was, thought it was still maybe 10:30. Said she'd just been relaxing with her eyes closed. We told her what happened and she thought we were messing with her. Wouldn't believe any of it. She wasn't even joking. She genuinely had no idea what we were talking about. Then Will checked the time on his phone and got quiet. It was 1:47 a.m. None of us could account for the last hour. We remembered seeing the first set of lights around midnight. The last thing I remembered before that was noticing how still the air felt. But after the triangle turned into a line, I don't know what we were doing. I don't remember sitting up or lying down or looking away. It was like something cut the reel and pasted it back together. Maya stood up and brushed off her jeans. She looked uneasy, like she didn't want to be out there anymore. Said she had a headache and needed to lie down in the truck. Will went with her. Carter and I stayed a little longer. We didn't say much. Just watched the sky, hoping something would come back. Nothing did. Eventually, we packed everything up and headed out. The drive back into town was dead quiet. I remember thinking it was odd that we didn't pass a single other car, even on the state road. Just empty blacktop and our headlights. When we dropped Carter off at his place, he leaned into the window and said, "That wasn't normal, man. I know what planes look like. I know what drones look like. That wasn't either." I nodded, and he looked relieved that I didn't argue. The next day, Maya still had no memory of any of it. Not just the lights. She didn't remember lying down for that long, or that weird stillness, or anything after maybe 11:30. We all hung out the following weekend and tried to talk about it again, but it felt like the more we tried to pin it down, the less sense it made. Will said he kept trying to remember how the lights disappeared. Not the distant ones that faded out, but the close ones that changed shape. He said it was like they turned into a single point and shrunk, not moved away, but folded into a dot that just wasn't there anymore. I tried drawing the formations later, and they never looked right. The movements were too smooth, two-dimensional, like trying to sketch water folding itself into patterns. Carter doesn't like talking about it anymore. Says he keeps dreaming about that silence. That part right before we noticed the lights, when everything just stopped. He says in the dream it's longer, like we were sitting in that silence for hours. I've gone back to Crooked Hollow once since then, by myself, just to sit and look. I didn't see anything weird, but the sky didn't feel the same. It felt blank, like something had already passed through, like whatever we saw wasn't coming back. It was the second week of December, maybe 4 or 5 days after that last big snow. I remember because I just finished patching the cabin roof the weekend before, trying to beat the storm. My cousin Dale had canceled on me again, so I was out in the Manistee woods by myself, hunting whitetail. I don't usually go out solo, not that deep, but I've done it enough times to know the trails. I park off a service road near where county line meets the forest boundary. From there, it's about a mile hike in, mostly flat with some ridges. You lose cell service about halfway through, but I always mark the route with blaze tape and leave notes in my truck just in case. Anyway, I left the truck around 6 a.m., still dark, temp around 20. Had my thermos, my Marlin 3030, and my old lab mix Tippo trotting beside me. He's too old to chase anything now, but he still likes being out in the cold. Nose to the wind, tail wagging. The snow was powdery and about knee-deep in places. No wind, sky was that bluish gray you get before sunrise. By the time we got to the clearing I usually set up in, it was light enough to see our breath. I took a few steps into the tree line on the far side. There's this little natural blind between two big pines. That's when Tippo started acting strange. He stopped short of the tree line, stiff-legged. Not growling, just frozen. I called him, and he didn't come. I figured maybe he smelled something. Coyote, maybe a bear. I scanned the trees with my scope. Nothing. No movement, no tracks besides ours, just empty woods. After a minute, he turned back and sat down in the snow, facing the way we came. Tail curled around him like he was done for the day. I thought about going back to him, but I'd just gotten everything set. Figured he'd wander over once he got bored. I was maybe 30 minutes into my sit when I saw the first thing that didn't make sense. Just off to my left, maybe 60, 70 yards out, the snow looked wrong. It was flat, totally smooth, not drifted like the rest. At first I thought it was a frozen patch of marsh or a shallow pond I'd forgotten about, but I'd walked that way a dozen times before and never seen water there. I glassed it with the scope. The surface was perfectly level, no mounds, no animal prints, and it wasn't reflecting the trees the way ice normally would. More like the reflection wasn't quite syncing up. I know that sounds weird. It was like the shape of the branches in the reflection didn't match the ones I was looking at above it, just slightly off. I figured maybe it was some kind of light trick, or maybe snow had melted from a buried rock shelf. So I packed up and decided to take a closer look. The closer I got, the more it felt wrong underfoot. The snow got thinner, like it had been compressed or melted evenly in a perfect circle. It wasn't warm, I touched it, but the layer was only an inch thick near the center. All around the outer edge it got deeper again, like a clean line had been drawn. It was about 20 feet across. Dead, perfect circle. No tire tracks, no boot animal signs, no broken twigs. I walked the whole perimeter twice. The trees were undisturbed. Nothing had been dragged in, nothing had landed with legs or skids. It was just there, flattened, silent, untouched. The weirdest part was how quiet it got. I didn't even notice it at first, just thought it was a still morning. But after a minute, I realized I couldn't hear a single bird. No squirrels rustling, no branches creaking, just windless silence. Even Tippo wasn't barking or moving. I turned to look for him. He was gone. I called out once, twice. No sound. I tried whistling. Nothing. I walked back the way I came, following my boot prints. After about 20 yards, I saw him standing on the trail, completely still, just watching me. When I got closer, I saw he'd peed himself. He was shaking, barely blinking. I've never seen that dog scared of anything. Not thunderstorms, not gunshots. I clipped the leash on him and started back toward the circle, thinking maybe it had spooked him somehow, and he just wanted out. But he dug in hard, started whining, pulled backward. He wouldn't go near it. I tugged for a second, then gave up. Just stood there, looking back at it from the trail. That's when I noticed the air above it. There was something, I don't know. Hard to explain. The space over the circle shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. But it was 20 degrees out, no sun. And the shimmer was tight, only over the flattened area. It didn't blur anything behind it, just hovered. Then I heard a sound. Not loud, more like a thrum, low and steady, like standing next to a big transformer. But there weren't any power lines for miles. I stood there a long time. Long enough that I realized the snow hadn't disturbed at all. No flakes falling, no wind kicking anything up. It It was like the weather stopped, just in that pocket. Eventually, I started to feel this weird pressure behind my ears, like cabin pressure in a plane. Tippo was pacing now, pulling the leash taut, trying to drag me back toward the truck. I let him lead. I kept looking back, but nothing moved. The shimmer was still there. The circle stayed perfect. We made it back to the truck by mid-morning. I checked my watch, and it said 11:12. But the drive had only taken 20 minutes on the way in, and we hadn't stayed long. It didn't make sense. I checked my phone, but the time matched. I didn't remember 3 hours passing. I sat in the truck with the heater running for a while, just staring out at the woods, trying to figure out what I'd seen, or if I'd imagined it. But Tippo wouldn't settle. He paced the back seat the whole way home. That night, I checked the weather cams in the area. There's a forestry station a few miles north with a live stream. Around the time I was near the circle, the camera feed froze for 11 minutes. Just cut out. Came back on like nothing happened. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. Not because I'm scared exactly, more because I don't think it wants to be found again. A couple weeks later, Dale finally called me back. Said we should do a late season hunt together. I told him the snow was too deep. But really, I just didn't want to see that place empty again. Or worse, see it not empty. I spent the better part of my life staring at radar screens, guiding planes through controlled chaos, making sure nobody ended up in a pile-up thousands of feet in the air. Retired now, living quiet in a small town in northern Idaho. Fishing, reading, fixing the occasional leak around the house, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy. But there's this one night that keeps circling in my head, even though I promised myself I'd just forget it. It was late November, about 3 years ago. The kind of cold night where the sky is so clear it almost hurts to look up. I was still consulting part-time for a regional control center, just monitoring a few flights from home on my radar setup. Nothing too busy, mostly cargo and small private planes. Around 11 p.m., I noticed a tiny blip on my screen way up high, much higher than usual. It was sitting at roughly 80,000 feet. I double-checked the altitude because it didn't make sense. Commercial jets rarely cruise above 45,000 or 50,000 feet and 80,000 feet. That's almost twice that. That's near space. Military or spy planes sometimes get close, but nothing civilian and nothing I was aware of scheduled that night. I kept watching it, trying to figure out what it was. It hovered there, just a single dot, not moving. For about 30 seconds, it stayed put. No blinking, no transponder code, nothing. Like it was ignoring all the usual radar protocols. Then, in one heartbeat, well, more like 1 second, the blip dropped straight down, from 80,000 feet to about 200 feet above the ground. I swear it looked like someone hit fast forward. I blinked and double-checked the data. No glitch, no system error. The machine wasn't lying. The dot was now low, almost hovering near ground level, right above a stretch of dense forest about 40 miles northeast of Spokane. The speed it covered was impossible for anything I knew, even top-secret military tech. I radioed the regional supervisor, hoping maybe someone else had eyes on it, maybe radar confirmation from another station. Static. No response. Tried again. Nothing. That was odd. I tapped into flight data from nearby airports, just to see if any planes had reported unusual sightings or if any control centers picked up strange radar contacts. Nothing came up. Then, just like it appeared, the blip vanished. No gradual fade out, just gone. I sat there for a minute, staring at the blank spot on the screen. The entire sequence had taken about 90 seconds from start to finish. My mind raced, but I kept trying to stick to facts. Maybe a radar ghost, maybe some software hiccup, but the system was old but reliable, and I knew its quirks well enough. The next morning, I called the regional center to file a report. I explained what I saw and asked if they had any record of it. The guy on the other end was polite, but firm. He said, "No official record and you're not to file anything about that. It's best left off the books." I asked why. No answer. Just, "It's for your own good." I found that strange. This was the same agency I'd worked for decades. Usually they're all about documentation, especially something that bizarre. And I'm not the type to stir up trouble, so that made me pause. I pressed a little, asking if this was some kind of classified exercise, maybe a test flight. The line went silent for a moment. Then the guy said, "You saw what you saw. Just keep it quiet." After that, I didn't get any more calls or follow-ups. The radar software didn't show any updates or corrections. No official word ever came out about unidentified objects that night. It wasn't just the blip's impossible drop that got to me. It was the way the whole thing felt wrong from the moment I saw it, like a puzzle piece that didn't belong. In the days after, I found myself double-checking my own systems, running diagnostics. Nothing was wrong, no glitches, the equipment was working perfectly. But the strangest part? For the next 2 weeks, I caught myself glancing up at the sky more than usual, especially at night. It felt like something was watching back. Not hostile, but patient. One night, about 10 days later, I was out on my porch with my dog, a scrappy mutt named Hobbs, when I noticed a strange, steady light far off to the northeast. It wasn't blinking like a plane, didn't move like a helicopter, and wasn't the bright, steady glow of a distant town. Just a pale, white orb hanging motionless against the stars. Hobbs growled low and pulled at his leash, but I convinced him to stay. The light stayed for a good 15 minutes, then vanished without a trace. I chalked it up to a satellite or maybe a weather balloon, but deep down, I knew that was different. Since then, I keep the radar on at night, scanning for anything odd. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see something that shouldn't be there. I've told a few friends in the trade, but none have seen anything like it. And I don't blame them for thinking I'm nuts. But I'm telling you now, there was something on that screen that night. Something that dropped from the edge of space to treetop level in a blink, then disappeared without a trace, and no one wants it talked about. I usually hike late at night when the trails are empty and the world feels quieter. It's just me, my pack, and my dog, Dusty, a lean black lab with a white patch on his chest that looks like a splash of paint. We started this particular hike just after midnight, the kind of cold spring night where the air smells sharp and the woods sound muffled. The trail I chose winds up a hill a few miles outside a small town in Oregon, near the foothills of the Cascades. It's not crowded, and the summit has a good view of the stars, which is why I go. I needed the quiet that night, away from everything. Work had been brutal for weeks. We reached the top after about 45 minutes of climbing through thick trees and scrambling over loose rocks. Dusty was restless, sniffing everything, occasionally sitting and staring off into the dark. I set down my pack and pulled out a thermos of coffee, leaning against a rock to look up. That's when I noticed something weird with the stars directly above the hilltop. I'm used to looking at the night sky, always have been. But those stars didn't look quite right. They didn't twinkle or blink the way stars normally do, and there was this subtle motion to them, like they were part of a slowly rotating pattern. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, maybe the cold or the fatigue. I blinked and stared harder. The stars seemed to shimmer together, like the whole patch of sky was a camouflage surface rotating very slowly. Not fast enough to be immediately obvious, but if I focused for a few minutes, I could tell the shapes and patterns shifted. It was like watching a giant kaleidoscope turn almost imperceptibly. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Dusty growled low and looked up too, his ears twitching. That was strange. He usually ignores the stars. I turned on my flashlight to check my watch. About 1:15 a.m., then I noticed a faint humming sound like distant machinery, just below the wind noise through the trees. It was so soft I almost didn't catch it. I paused and listened. Dusty sat down beside me, alert. The humming didn't come from the town, which was miles away, and there were no roads or power lines nearby that would explain it. I figured it was some weird natural thing, maybe the wind interacting with the trees. But the sound was steady and low, not random. I looked back up at the stars. The shifting pattern was still there, and something about the geometry felt off. Like it wasn't random star clusters, but shapes arranged on purpose. Triangles, diamonds, lines connecting points. The shapes moved slowly, rearranging themselves. I took a step back from the rock and tried to look around. The forest below the hill was black and still, but just past the tree line, I caught what looked like a faint glow. Not bright like a flashlight, but like soft blue light pooling on the ground. I called out, but no answer. Dusty growled again, ears pinned back. Feeling uneasy, I packed up quickly. The shifting stars and that humming weren't normal. As we descended, the light vanished. The humming faded too, swallowed by the forest sounds. When we got back to the car about an hour later, I noticed the dashboard clock was almost 15 minutes behind what my watch had shown at the summit. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe I just lost track of time, but the weirdest part came the next day. I was talking to my friend Rachel on the phone, telling her about the hike and the strange star patterns. She paused, then said, "Wait, didn't you tell me last week you went hiking by that hill? On Friday night?" I was sure it was last night, Monday. I checked my phone's photo timestamps and my GPS trail log. All of them said Monday night. Rachel sounded confused. She insisted I had mentioned going out the previous Friday and said she remembered because she'd warned me about a storm coming in. I was sure I hadn't gone out Friday. No weather alerts had been in effect Monday, but a small thunderstorm had rolled through Friday night. I double-checked my work schedule and calendar. No hikes Friday. No idea how I'd gotten the nights mixed up. That was when I started questioning the whole thing. Maybe the shift in the stars was some kind of optical illusion after all. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the summit for a while and dreamed the whole pattern. Except Dusty seemed spooked for days afterward. He kept staring up at the sky at night, ears twitching. A few nights later, I went back to the same hilltop, this time just before dawn. The stars were back to normal, steady and twinkling. No humming, no shifting patterns, no strange lights. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I check the sky from my backyard, hoping to see that subtle rotation again, but it never comes. And I'm left wondering if that night was a glitch, a weird moment where the sky warped just enough to remind me how little I really understand what's out there. The night I lost control of the drone was one of those clear, cool evenings that felt good to be outside in. Nothing pressing me down, no work emails, just the quiet air and the city lights far below. I was up on the ridge behind my place in Eugene, Oregon, launching the drone to get some footage of the valley at night. The ridge is a favorite spot for drone pilots like me. Open sky, no trees blocking signal, and the city sprawls out below like a blanket of little flickering lamps. My name's Caleb, and I've been flying drones for a few years now, mostly as a hobby, sometimes for a bit of freelance work. I like the quiet control it gives me, the way it feels like I'm the only one up there, moving through the air in this little mechanical bird. I was flying the latest model I'd gotten, the Skyraven Pro, which has a decent flight time and a stable camera. That night I had the camera set to manual mode so I could get crisp, clean footage. I launched the drone around 10:30 p.m. The sky was pitch black, stars bright, and there was a cool breeze coming off the Willamette River. I got it up about 400 feet, pointing the camera down over the city, catching the streetlights and the occasional car headlights. I was feeling good, playing with the controls, adjusting the exposure on the camera, when I noticed a soft glow far out past the ridge in the distance, over the hills about 10 miles away. It wasn't like city lights, more like a single steady light, kind of low to the ground but bright, almost too bright to be a house or street lamp. I thought maybe it was some sort of radio tower or industrial facility I hadn't noticed before. I figured I'd send the drone that way to get a closer look. I pushed the joystick, aiming it straight toward the light. The drone started moving smoothly, heading out over the dark forest below, the signal strong and steady. The camera feed was crisp and I was tracking the light, curious. Then, about a minute into the flight toward the light, the drone just stopped responding. At first, I thought maybe a glitch. The controller beeped once, then twice. The video feed froze for a second, then came back. I tried moving the sticks, but nothing. The drone wasn't responding. I started hitting the buttons, trying to trigger a return to home or a manual override, but nothing, no response. The signal strength stayed strong, which made no sense. It was like the drone was ignoring me. I kept talking out loud, like that would help. Come on, buddy, don't do this. I'm just trying to get some shots. Dusty, my dog, A skinny border collie mix with a white stripe down her nose was sitting next to me, tilting her head like she knew something was off. The drone kept moving, but not according to my controls. Instead, it was flying perfectly straight toward that distant light, at a steady pace and altitude. No wobbles, no hesitation. Like it had a mission it was following without me. I kept trying to override it, but it was like the controls were disconnected. For 2 full minutes, I just watched the feed. The drone was heading deeper into the hills, getting closer to the light. The thing was, the light didn't look like any normal source. No flickering, no movement, no other lights around it. Just this steady, pale glow hovering above the ground, or maybe coming from something tall. The trees around it didn't move, and there wasn't any sound I could hear from my spot on the ridge. After those 2 minutes, the drone abruptly stopped moving forward, hovered for maybe 10 seconds, then the video feed cut out. The controller said signal lost, and the drone started to beep that slow find me sound. I hit the return to home button again. The drone finally responded, making a slow, steady path back toward me. When it landed, I grabbed it right away and checked the footage on my phone. That's when it got stranger. The footage showed the drone flying straight to the light, like I'd seen, but right as it reached the glow, the image blurred for a second, then a faint shape flickered in the frame, like a tall, thin silhouette against the light, but just for a fraction of a second, too quick to make out any details. After that, the drone abruptly zoomed backward and returned home. I replayed that moment over and over, zooming in on the figure, but it was impossible to see anything clear. I double-checked the drone for damage or glitches, but everything seemed fine. The battery was good, the camera lens clean, and the firmware up to date. I tried contacting the manufacturer to report the control loss and strange footage. They basically told me that without more data, it was probably interference or a glitch, and to avoid flying near any strong light sources or power lines. That felt like a brush-off. I've flown in a lot of places, but I'd never lost control like that. Not for 2 full minutes, and not with the drone making a beeline for something I hadn't told it to go toward. The weirdest part was how calm the drone was the whole time. No shaking, no sudden movements. It was like it had a purpose, flying that perfect straight line in total silence. After that night, Dusty stayed restless whenever we went near the ridge after dark. She'd growl softly and stare up toward the hills, her hair on end. I've thought about going back out there with the drone, trying to catch whatever that light was. But every time I consider it, something in me hesitates. Like I don't want to see whatever that glow really is up close. It's just a light, right? Something explainable. But the way the drone acted, the shadow in the footage, the silence, it doesn't line up with anything I know. I'm still flying drones, but I'm careful now. Avoid that ridge at night. And when Dusty stares up at the hills, I don't argue. I woke up because the fire was almost out. It was just past midnight, maybe closer to 1 a.m., and the cold was creeping in fast. The night was quieter than I expected. No crickets or wind, just this thick, unnatural stillness that made everything feel tense. My buddy Jonah was still passed out next to me on the sleeping pad, snoring softly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We'd set up camp in this clearing deep in the Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia, about 2 miles off the main trail. It was late October, and the nights had that biting chill where you want to stay bundled up, but can't stop thinking about the shadows beyond the trees. We'd been hiking all day, cutting firewood to keep warm, and I remember stacking the logs right next to the fire pit before we crashed. I'd counted them twice, made sure we had enough for the night. Maybe 20 or so pieces, mostly small logs and kindling. So when I got up and looked around, the stack was gone. The fire pit had a few last embers glowing, but the wood we'd collected was completely missing. I woke Jonah, shaking his shoulder. "Dude, our firewood is gone." He groaned, rubbed his eyes, and sat up. "What are you talking about? It was right here." "I know. I counted it last night." We both scanned the clearing, confused, until Jonah spotted something. Look. About 100 feet away, near the edge of the clearing where the tree line started, there was something on the ground. We grabbed our headlamps and walked over. The firewood wasn't just dumped there, it was arranged in a perfect spiral. Each piece of wood spaced exactly the same distance apart, curling inward in a wide, sweeping circle maybe 20 feet across. The logs weren't tossed randomly. Someone or something had taken the time to lay them out like that. Jonah bent down and touched one. This was definitely the same wood. I can tell by the splinters. I noticed the spiral wasn't centered on anything, just the clearing itself, and the pattern was too precise to be natural. We both looked at each other like, what the hell? We started back toward the fire pit, trying to make sense of it. My mind jumped to the usual camping stories. Maybe pranksters? But we hadn't heard or seen anyone else all day, and the trail to the clearing was pretty obscure. Plus, the nearest campsite was miles away. Jonah said, maybe a raccoon or bear dragged it off? I laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. A bear dragging firewood around in a spiral? No way. We decided to grab some logs from the spiral and bring them back, just so we wouldn't freeze. Back at the fire pit, the wind started picking up, soft rustling through the trees, but no real gusts. The fire came alive again, and the warmth was welcome. We sat down, both quiet. Dusty, Jonah's dog, a lean black lab with a white patch on his chest, was restless, pacing along the edge of the clearing and growling low under his breath. I asked, "You think something's out there?" Jonah shrugged, but his eyes were sharp. Maybe, or maybe we just stumbled on some weird animal behavior. We stayed up a while longer, watching the fire and listening. I kept glancing toward the spiral, where the logs sat evenly spaced on the dirt. Dusty kept staring at the tree line. Around 3 a.m., the fire was dying again. I went to grab another log, but the spiral was empty. Every single piece of firewood was gone. Jonah woke up to my voice, confused again. I told him what happened. He grabbed his flashlight, and we ran to the edge of the clearing, shining the beam into the forest. Nothing. No sign of the wood, no broken branches or footprints, just dark trees. Dusty was barking now, louder and more urgent, staring into the shadows beyond the clearing. We didn't hear footsteps, no rustling, no animal sounds. We sat back down by the dying fire, nerves fraying. I kept trying to figure out if we just lost time somehow. Had we fallen asleep and woken up hours later? Neither of us could say. Then, just before dawn, we noticed something else. On the ground near the fire pit, there were faint marks in the dirt. Circular patterns, like the edge of a wheel pressed into the soil. The dirt was compacted in a way that didn't match any of our gear or boots. The marks were about 3 feet across, perfectly round. We looked at each other again. Neither of us moved. The sun started to rise, faint pink light bleeding through the trees. We packed up as fast as we could, Dusty tugging on the leash, restless. We took a last look at the clearing. The spiral was gone, the ground scuffed. When we got back to the main trail, we saw fresh footprints, ours, plus some that didn't match anything we knew. They disappeared after a few hundred yards, as if whoever or whatever had been there simply vanished. The whole way back to the car, we barely spoke. I still don't understand what happened out there. The spiral, the missing firewood, the strange marks, none of it fits anything I know from camping, hiking, or even wildlife. It's the kind of thing that makes you question what you saw, if it was real or just a weird dream. But Dusty still won't go near that part of the forest, and neither will I. I was walking my dog, Luna, just after sunset on a cool spring evening out near my place in southern Illinois. It's mostly farmland out there, wide open fields stretching for miles, and I like the quiet after a long day. That night, the sky was mostly clear, the kind of blue that fades slowly to deep purple as the sun dips below the horizon. Luna was pulling me toward the edge of the field behind our house, sniffing like crazy. I let her off the leash sometimes there because the neighbors are far enough away she can run without bothering anyone. As we reached the far corner of the field, I caught a flicker out of the corner of my eye, something bright and low, almost glowing near the tree line. At first, I thought it was some kind of farming equipment or a vehicle, but there was no sound. No tractor, no engine, just this light. It wasn't like a flashlight or car headlight either. It was round, and it seemed to hover just above the ground. I froze for a second, Luna tugging at the leash. The light was a steady, intense white. almost like a spotlight, but softer around the edges like it was surrounded by a faint glow. I blinked and it seemed to move a little closer to the ground, then just stopped. I called Luna back, tugging the leash, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" I wanted to believe it was some weird reflection or a drone, but there was no noise at all. The field was completely silent except for Luna's paws scraping the dirt and the faint hum of cicadas starting up. I decided to get closer, but I didn't want to go too near alone, so I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Emily. She lives just a few miles away and usually answers late, especially if it's something weird. Emily was here within 10 minutes. We walked back to the field together with Luna. When we got near the spot where I'd seen the light, everything felt off. The air was still, heavier than usual, and the usual night sounds had gone quiet. The crickets stopped chirping, the wind dropped completely, and even Luna was silent, ears twitching. The light was gone. Nothing there now except the tall grass bending in the faint breeze. But the grass in one spot, maybe a 10-foot circle, looked strange. I knelt down and touched it. It was dry and crunchy, like it had been burned or melted. The blades were stuck together in a crusty mat, like someone had poured wax over them. It smelled faintly of something metallic, almost like burnt copper. Emily and I looked at each other, both a little weirded out. No one else was around, no footprints or tire tracks nearby. The field was empty, but that spot didn't look natural. It was perfectly round, like a giant circle had been pressed down or heated evenly from above. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but for some reason, the camera wouldn't focus on the spot. It just kept blurring, like it was having trouble seeing whatever was there. I switched to video, and the image flickered weirdly for a second, then cleared. Emily was shaking her head. "That's really weird. Did you see anything else? Any lights or sounds when you got here?" I told her about the bright light, how it was just there, hovering, then gone. We waited for a few minutes, eyes scanning the darkening field, but nothing happened. No sounds came back. The usual night noises stayed silent. When we turned to walk back, Luna stopped suddenly and growled low, looking toward the tree line. I didn't see anything, but my skin crawled. I felt like we were being watched. We headed home faster than before, Luna pulling hard on the leash. When we got inside, I checked the clock. We'd only been out maybe 20 minutes since I first saw the light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing little pops and hisses from outside, like static or tiny electrical shocks. When I checked the window, there was nothing but empty darkness and distant stars. The next day, I went back to the field during daylight. The grass circle was still there, dry and brittle, but no one had been near it. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of people. The soil underneath looked darker, almost scorched. I called the local extension office to see if they knew anything about unusual chemicals or agricultural treats that might explain it. They said no, nothing reported recently in that area. Over the next few days, I kept checking on the spot. The grass stayed dead and brittle, but no one else seemed to have noticed anything strange. I didn't tell many people because I didn't want to sound crazy. One evening, Emily and I went back again, this time with a cheap infrared thermometer I'd picked up. The ground in the circle was a few degrees warmer than the surrounding field, even though it hadn't rained and the air was cool. Nothing else out of the ordinary showed up on the meter, but the temperature difference stayed steady. I started having weird dreams that week, too. Nothing clear, just flashes of light and a low buzzing sound I couldn't place. I'd wake up with the feeling that someone or something was nearby, just out of sight. I've never been someone to believe in UFOs or anything like that, but after that night and the circle in the grass, I don't know what to think. It's like whatever I saw was real, but no one else will see it or hear it or feel it. The strange silence in the field still haunts me sometimes, like the world just stopped for a minute there, and something else was waiting. I haven't gone back after dark since that night. Luna doesn't pull me toward the field anymore either. I'm not sure if she senses something too. I guess it's just one of those things I'll never really understand. It was around 2:15 a.m. when I got the call about a suspicious vehicle parked on the side of Old Mill Road, just outside the town limits of Westbridge. I was working the overnight shift, cruising in my patrol car down the stretch of two-lane highway that cuts through a mix of farmland and thick woods. It's usually dead quiet out there. Nothing much happens past midnight, which is exactly why a call like that stood out. When I pulled up to the spot, I saw the car right away. A silver sedan idling in the gravel just off the shoulder, headlights bright and piercing the darkness. The driver's side door was wide open, swinging slightly with the breeze. I killed my engine and grabbed my flashlight, radioing dispatch that I was on scene. I was already nervous because nothing about the scene made sense. The car was empty, no one in sight. But the engine was still running, and the headlights weren't dimmed or flickering, they were just steady and sharp. I noticed something odd on the driver's seat. A smartphone, screen lit up, recording. The phone was pointed straight up at the sky, but whatever it was filming was obscured by static, like bad reception, but the weird part was it wasn't moving. The static filled the whole screen. I called out, "Hello? Anybody here?" But only the wind answered, carrying the low hum of the engine and the distant cry of an owl. I circled the car with my flashlight, checking the back seat, the passenger side. Nothing. No signs of a struggle, no bags or belongings, no notes, no driver's license or ID left behind that I could see through the windows. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I radioed dispatch again, told them about the abandoned vehicle, left running, door open, phone recording the sky. They told me to stay put while they ran the plates. The car wasn't stolen, and no reports of missing persons matched the description or timing. That just made it stranger. While I waited, I kept glancing up at the phone screen, watching the static fuzz. After a few minutes, I noticed the sky wasn't right. It was a clear night, but there was this strange dullness, like the stars were dimmed, or the sky had a faint shimmer to it, as if a thin layer of heat haze was stretched tight over the treetops. Then I heard it, the sound. Not a noise exactly, but a subtle vibration under my feet, like the earth was humming low and steady. It wasn't natural, not the usual sounds of a late night on the country. The air felt thick, heavier. I glanced down the road. No cars, no houses, no lights except my patrol car and the sedan's headlights. The woods stood silent, no movement at the edges. Dusty shadows. I pulled out my radio again, but the static hissed louder than my voice. It was like the signal was breaking up. Interference, but weirdly consistent. My screen on the radio started flickering like the phone. The phone screen showed the same static, but if I stared long enough, I thought I could see faint blurry shapes moving behind the fuzz, like something was there, just out of focus. I looked up into the night sky again. The stars had shifted, just a little, like the whole sky was slowly rotating. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't change. It felt off, wrong somehow. I tried to shake it off, told myself the night had been long, my shift dragging on. But then the phone made a low pulsing beep, like it was signaling something, or maybe warning. I knelt down, reaching for it, but as I did, the car's engine cut out. The headlights blinked off and the phone screen went dark. The whole clearing went pitch black, except for my flashlight beam. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the woods on the far side of the road. Not close, but steady, like something, or someone, was moving slowly through the trees, keeping pace with the tapping. I stood up fast, shining the flashlight toward the noise, but it stopped. Just like that, nothing. No crackling twigs, no rustle of leaves. I stayed frozen for a moment, trying to hear anything else. Dusty, the K9 unit dog I was shadowing this week, was restless in the backseat of the cruiser, whining softly. I radioed dispatch again, but the line was dead. No response, no static, just silence. I walked back to the car, heart racing, and grabbed my radio to try again. This time it sparked to life, the static louder, the faint sound of a voice almost audible, but nothing clear. Just white noise with a hint of something like breathing. I decided to call for backup. They said they'd send a unit in 20 minutes. While I waited, I couldn't stop watching the sky. The stars seemed to shimmer and pulse, the darkness between them almost like a veil fluttering. The air grew colder, a dry chill that crawled down my neck. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered, dimmed, and went out. I tried clicking it back on, but it was dead. I reached in my jacket for another light, and as I pulled it out, the tapping started again, this time closer, around the back of the patrol car. I spun around, shining the beam blindly into the darkness, but saw nothing. I checked the time. Only about 10 minutes since I'd called backup. Then, right in front of me, the car's driver's side slammed down shut with a loud bang. I jumped back, hands raised, heart pounding, ears straining for any other sounds. I ran to the door, tried it. It was locked. I pulled my keys out and unlocked it quickly, climbing in. The door was cold. No sign of who or what had shut it. Inside, the dashboard lights flickered, then settled, and the radio crackled back to life with normal static. Backup arrived a few minutes later. I told them what happened, but when we went back to check the car and the surrounding area, there was no sign of anything unusual. No footprints in the gravel, no disturbances in the woods, no phone on the seat. The next day, I went back alone to the spot. The gravel where the car had been was smooth and undisturbed. The woods around were silent, just like any other morning. But the feeling lingered. I still think about that night. About the abandoned car, the running engine, the phone filming static sky, and about the way the stars seemed different. The whole thing felt like something trying to get my attention, or maybe just watching, but I have no idea what. The power went out just after 9 p.m. in Harlan, a small town nestled between rolling hills and thick woods in eastern Kentucky. I remember because I'd just finished the dishes and the kitchen clock blinked 12 like it always did after a power failure. But this time, the blackout wasn't your usual quick glitch. It stretched on, and weirdly, nothing in the house worked. Not the clocks, not the stove, not even my old battery-powered radio. At first, I thought maybe it was just my place, but a glance out the window told me otherwise. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no headlights on passing cars. Even the distant glow from the cell tower blinked out. It was silent in a way I hadn't felt before. My dog, Buster, a scruffy little mutt I'd rescued a year earlier, got restless. He paced around the living room, low whining. I tried turning on the flashlight on my phone, but it just blacked out like everything else. I glanced at the wall clock in the hallway. It wasn't moving, not a single tick or secondhand movement. The silence was so complete, it felt like time had just stopped. I checked my watch. It was dead too. My mind started racing. I went outside for a cigarette, stepping onto the porch. The night air was unusually still, no breeze, no rustle in the trees. The stars were sharp and clear, but somehow looked different, like someone had turned down their brightness and added a subtle haze. I waved down my neighbor, Roy. He was standing in his driveway, arms crossed, staring up at the sky with this odd blank expression. "Roy, you got power?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Nothing. All dead." His voice was quiet, like he was trying not to panic. We both stood there, looking around. After maybe 10 minutes, I went back inside and tried the landline phone. No dial tone. Same with my old cordless phone. Nothing worked. The weird thing was, my watch and the clocks, digital or analog, they weren't just off. They weren't moving at all. Not a tick, not a blink. It was like they'd frozen, stopped dead in time. I checked the stove clock again, same time as when the power cut out. I kept glancing at it, hoping to see movement, but nothing. The blackout lasted about 45 minutes-ish, though it felt much longer. When the power finally flickered back on, it came on with that low hum, and then all the clocks flashed 9:47 p.m. But here's the thing. None of us felt like 45 minutes had passed. Everyone I talked to said it felt more like a few minutes, or even no time at all. The day after, the town was buzzing. Phones worked again, the traffic lights were blinking, but something felt off. People were tired and a little dazed. I overheard Mrs. Nefrias Callahan at the grocery store telling her son how her wall clock had stopped completely during the blackout, and then started again, exactly where it left off. Everyone's devices acted the same, but what really got to me was how many people started talking about this strange dream. It wasn't just one or two. It was half the town, I swear. Same dream. People swore they dreamed about a big, featureless field under a dim sky, with nothing but a faint low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Some said they saw a pale glow hovering just above the ground. Others described feeling watched but couldn't see who or what was watching. I didn't want to believe it was some mass hallucination or a prank, but it wasn't like those dreams you can just brush off. They were vivid and left this cold emptiness in the chest when people woke up. Emily, who runs the diner, told me she woke up sweating, her heart pounding. She said she felt like she'd been waiting for something that never came. Buster wouldn't go near the backyard for days. He'd growl at the wood's edge, staring into the dark like something was out there, but I never saw anything. A few others said their phones glitched, showing static or weird symbols on the screen for a second when the power came back, but no one could explain what they meant. I started noticing that my own watch, even after the power returned, ran a bit slow, like it was struggling to catch up. I tried resetting it, but it just lagged again. I joked about it to my wife, Claire, but she was too quiet. She said her dreams were worse, like something was crawling just beneath her skin, watching her sleep. No one talked about it openly like we're supposed to. It was like this thing happened, then we all agreed to act normal. But every time I walk past the clock in the kitchen, it makes me think of that night, the way it froze and how long the silence stretched. I don't know what caused the blackout or why all those clocks stopped dead or why so many people dreamed the same strange thing right after. It's just one of those things that settled in the back of my mind, like an itch you can't reach. Sometimes when I'm alone and it's quiet, I swear I can hear that low hum from the dream, just under the hum of everyday life. I was flying alone that afternoon, heading back from a quick survey job over the Arizona desert. The sky was clear, dry heat shimmering off the rocks below, and the small Cessna hummed steadily beneath me. I like flying these routes. Quiet, no air traffic to worry about, just me and the vast empty land stretching out forever. My co-pilot that day was my old beagle, Ollie. He usually stayed calm in the cockpit, curled up on the floor, but that day he was restless, ears twitching every time the plane rattled from a minor gust. We'd climbed to about 7,500 feet when I noticed something odd in the distance, just below me. At first I thought it was another plane, but the shape didn't look right. It was definitely an aircraft, sleek, rounded edges, but it was flying upside down, which is unusual but not unheard of for military or stunt pilots. Only problem, there was no visible engine noise, no contrails, no propeller blur, nothing. It moved silently and smooth, almost like it was gliding without effort. And it didn't have the usual control surfaces you'd expect, like rudders or flaps, just a smooth, solid shape. I figured maybe it was a military drone or some kind of test craft, but I'm civilian, and I wasn't expecting any flights in this area. Plus, the craft was flying underneath me at a lower altitude, but perfectly matched to my speed. I adjusted my heading slightly to get a better look, but the moment I did, it banked slowly and matched my course exactly, still inverted. Ollie growled softly, low in his throat, something he almost never does. The whole thing felt off, like the laws of physics I know didn't apply. No engine noise, no heat distortion from an exhaust, no blinking lights, no navigation signals. The desert below looked the same, flat, endless, nothing out of place. But the craft's presence was just there. I radioed flight control, thinking maybe they'd picked up something or could identify the object, but no one responded. Probably outside of controlled airspace. I tried my phone, but the signal was spotty and it dropped. After a few minutes of flying side by side, the aircraft slowly began to rise, still upside down, and then about 500 feet below me, it just vanished. Like someone turned off a light. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. No contrail, no vapor trail, no sudden change in weather or anything that could explain it. I checked my instruments, everything normal. The altimeter, airspeed, engine gauges, no disturbance. Ollie had stopped growling but was alert, staring at the empty space where the craft had been. I shook my head, thinking I must be imagining things. Heat mirages are common over the desert, but this was too defined, too real. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but I kept glancing back, half expecting the shape to reappear. It didn't. When I landed, I mentioned it to the FBO mechanic, a guy named Earl who's seen a lot of odd stuff on the tarmac over the years. Earl raised his eyebrows and said, "You sure you weren't seeing things? Desert heat plays tricks on everyone." I told him about the lack of noise and the smooth, silent flight. He just shrugged and said, "Sounds like you met a ghost pilot." I didn't tell Claire, my wife, until the next day. She listened quietly and asked if I was feeling okay. I was just confused and unsettled. Ollie wouldn't stop pacing, which was new. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes when I fly alone, I look for that smooth, silent craft below me, but it never shows again. I was sitting on the couch late one Saturday night when my son, Eli, came up to me and my wife, Claire, looking shaken. He was 9, usually pretty calm and curious, but this time something was different. His eyes were wide, and his voice was low and jittery. "There's a man in the backyard," he said, "but he doesn't have a face. It's just light, like glowing all over." I looked at Claire, thinking maybe Eli had watched too many movies or read something weird, but he never said stuff like that without reason. I asked him to show me, so we grabbed our jackets and stepped outside. The backyard was pitch black except for the porch light near the back door. I flicked on the motion sensor floodlight we had mounted near the fence. Nothing. No one there. I looked up at the sky, clear a few stars, but I didn't feel right. Eli was holding our old golden retriever, Tucker's leash, but Tucker was calm, tail wagging. Usually, he'd bark at anything strange outside. This was just quiet. I went inside and pulled up the backyard camera feed on my phone. The camera covers most of the yard, pointed toward the fence line. What I saw was unsettling. For about 5 minutes, the screen was just static. Pure white noise. No picture at all. Then, the feed popped back on, showing the yard empty as usual. I rewound the video to see if the static was a glitch. It wasn't. The camera cut out exactly during the time Eli said he saw the man. I showed Claire, and we both exchanged a look that said we weren't sure what to make of it. The next day, I checked the camera logs and system reports. No outages, no errors. The camera was fine before and after those 5 minutes. The footage was just missing, replaced by static. I asked Eli to tell me everything he remembered. He said he was playing with his Legos near the window when he glanced outside. He saw the figure standing just past the garden near the fence in the shadow, but it wasn't like a regular person. He said the man's face was just light, no features, like someone had turned on a bright lamp where his face should be. The figure didn't move or speak, just stood there. Eli said he froze, didn't know what to do. Then the light started flickering, dimming, and brightening. After a few moments, the figure vanished. I wanted to believe Eli was imagining things, but there were other weird signs. That night, my phone's flashlight started turning on by itself. Sometimes it would blink rapidly, then shut off. It happened only when I was near the backyard door. Claire thought it was a software glitch, but I reset the phone multiple times with no change. I also noticed the power flickering for a few seconds around the house, especially near the back. Nothing major, but enough to make the lights blink. It always happened late at night. 2 days later, Eli was watching cartoons in the living room when the TV went black. Static on the screen, like an old channel losing signal. It lasted almost exactly 5 minutes, then came back on. The whole time, the backyard camera feed on my phone was static again. I started to feel like something was wrong with that side of the house. I asked a neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, if she'd seen anything strange. She's an older woman with a sharp eye. She said her porch light was flickering too, but she didn't see anything unusual. I even checked the fence line and the bushes. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. But Eli was convinced the figure wasn't just a trick. One evening, I decided to sit out on the porch with him and Tucker. We watched the yard as the sun went down. About 20 minutes after dark, I noticed a faint glow near the corner of the fence. At first, I thought it was a reflection from the streetlights, but there were no streetlights that close. The glow pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, almost like what Eli described. I pointed it out to Eli, and he just nodded. "That's him," he whispered. We stayed outside for about 10 minutes, the glow shifting slightly but never getting closer. Then it faded. The next day, I tried to fix the camera again. The static returned for the same 5-minute window. I contacted tech support. They said the signal was clean, the device was functioning normally, no interference detected. I didn't tell Eli about that part. I didn't want to scare him. Later that week, Claire installed an extra security light with a motion sensor near the fence. It's a bright LED that switches on whenever anything moves. That night at around 10:30, the light flashed on for a few seconds, then off. I checked outside, but no one was there. Eli was asleep, but Tucker was restless, pacing near the door. I sat on the couch, the light from the porch casting long shadows. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A notification from the backyard camera. Motion detected. I pulled up the feed. Static. 5 minutes. Then the image came back. Empty yard. I shut the app, feeling the weight of something I couldn't explain. Eli never said the man appeared again, but every now and then he'd pause during dinner and look toward the window, saying, "He's still there, just watching." I'd check outside, but never saw a thing. One morning, the security light was smashed. No sign of how it happened. The neighbors said they didn't hear anything. I fixed the light myself. Since then, the static on the camera hasn't returned, and the flickering stopped. But Eli's quiet moments watching the backyard haven't. And I keep wondering, what kind of light shows a face but no features? What stands there without moving, just watching? I don't know. I just know something was out there and somehow it didn't want to be seen. I was hiking alone near the edge of the Markham Forest just as the sun started dipping below the tree line. It was late October and the air had that cold bite you get before winter really sets in. I like going out around dusk because the woods quiet down and feel different, calmer but somehow heavier, like everything's holding its breath. My dog, Scout, a lean border collie mix, was with me, trotting ahead, nose low to the ground as usual. I'd been following one of the lesser-used trails, one that snakes through an older part of the forest where the trees grow close together and the underbrush is thick. About an hour into the hike, just when the light was fading fast, Scout stopped and started barking at something near a large maple. I called him back, but he wouldn't budge. I figured he'd found some old animal carcass or maybe a piece of trash, but when I got close, I saw something strange. Sticking out of the tree trunk, maybe 5 feet off the ground, was this oval-shaped metal object. It was about the size of a football, but thinner, like a flattened oval, and it was embedded so deeply that it looked like it had grown there or been fused with the wood. The bark around it had grown tight and smooth against the edges, no gaps or cracks. I ran my hand over it expecting cold metal, but instead it felt warm. Not hot, just a steady, gentle warmth that didn't fade even though the air was chilly. There were no seams, no screws, no bolts, nothing that suggested it was some kind of device or machine. The surface was smooth, matte gray, almost like a dull steel, but with no markings or labels. It didn't reflect light much, even as the sun disappeared behind the hills. I stepped back, suddenly feeling uneasy. I'd never seen anything like it in the woods. Scout was still barking, low and tense, his hackles raised. I called him again, and this time he came without hesitation. I debated for a minute whether to take a photo, but my phone was dead, probably from the cold, so I pocketed the thought and pulled out my lighter to get a bit more light. The flame flickered weakly in the evening breeze, casting strange shadows on the tree and that metal shape. The warmth from the object didn't seem to react to the flame. It stayed constant, like it was powered from inside. The weird part was the silence. No humming, no ticking, no vibrations at all. Just this heavy, solid presence against the tree. I touched it again, and this time the warmth spread slightly through my fingertips, not burning, but oddly comforting. I knelt down to get a better look when Scout suddenly growled low in his throat. I looked up and saw nothing, but the hair on my neck stood up. It was like the forest had gone completely quiet. All the usual sounds, the rustling leaves, birds, even the distant creek, had just stopped. I got to my feet fast, trying to shake the feeling off. That's when I noticed the shadows shifting. Not the trees or the branches, but some darker shapes moving just beyond the rim of the fading light. Nothing concrete, more like the space itself was bending or folding, but it felt deliberate, like something was watching. I grabbed Scout's collar and started heading back toward the trailhead. As we moved, I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the shadows didn't follow. They just flickered in and out, disappearing when I looked directly. By the time we reached the main path, it was almost dark. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the warmth from the metal object was already fading in my mind, replaced by this nagging feeling of wrongness. The next morning, I went back to the spot with my phone fully charged, hoping to take pictures, or at least show someone. When I got there, the tree was just a tree. No metal object, no scars or marks in the bark, nothing unusual at all. The spot where I'd felt warmth was just cold wood. I asked around town, old-timers, park rangers, even the local historical society, but no one had ever heard of anything like that or reported anything strange in that part of the forest. The strangest part is that since then, Scout won't go near that area. He gets tense, pulls hard on the leash, and whines if I try to lead him close. I keep thinking about that warmth, the silence, and the shadows. I don't know what I saw or what that object was, but it's stuck with me. Every time I close my eyes, I get this feeling like something is just beyond sight, waiting, watching. I went out just before sunrise to check the east pasture like I usually do. This was late March, cold mornings, but the frost had mostly lifted by the time I got out there. Still had to wear my canvas jacket though. Ground was stiff underfoot, sky that kind of pale gray blue it gets before the sun actually breaks over the ridge. I live on about 60 acres east of Buffalo, Wyoming. Nothing fancy. Just me, the horses, and the herd, 18 head of Black Angus plus a bull. Most of the time it's quiet. You get used to the wind, the coyotes, the weird thumps in the barn at night. But that morning, anyway, I was riding out with my dog, Piper, an old brindle mutt, half blue heeler, half question mark. She stays close to the saddle, smart dog, never chases the cows or spooks them. About 20 minutes in, just as we crested the little rise by the windbreak, I saw one of the cows standing off from the rest of the herd. About 50 yards out, near the far fence line. Alone, facing straight up. At first I figured she was just watching something, hawk, drone, maybe a low-flying plane, but then I noticed she wasn't blinking, just standing there. Still as a post. I nudged the mare forward and we got close enough for me to recognize her. It was Fern, one of the older girls, 12 years old. Has this little notch in her left ear from a gate accident back in 18. She didn't move when I got within 20 feet. Didn't twitch her ears, didn't flick her tail, just stood there, head tilted back, neck stretched up like she was craning to see something above her. I dismounted, told Piper to stay back, and walked up real slow. I figured maybe she was sick, rabies, tetanus, something neurological. I said her name out loud, just to see if she'd respond. Fern. Nothing. I touched her shoulder. Still nothing. Her eyes were wide open, glassy, locked straight up at the sky. I waved a hand in front of her face. No blink, no flinch. She wasn't paralyzed or frozen. I could feel her breathing slow and steady. Her muscles weren't tense. She was just locked in. I looked up thinking maybe I'd see what had her so fixated. There was nothing there. Just sky. No clouds, no plane trails, no birds. Dead still. I stood there a minute, trying to figure out what to do. I've dealt with sick cattle, injured cattle, even a case of bloat that damn near killed a steer. But this was different. She wasn't in pain, she wasn't panicked, she just wasn't there. Piper started whining behind me. She was pacing in tight little circles, tail low, nose to the ground like she was tracking something. But there was nothing. No scent, no tracks. Then the rest of the cows started bawling. I turned around and saw the herd bunched up on the opposite side of the pasture, all facing the same direction. South, toward the old cottonwood grove by the creek. I didn't see anything at first, but Piper wouldn't stop pacing and the cows wouldn't shut up. Then I heard this low, vibrating hum, barely audible, more like a pressure in my chest than a sound. I led Fern by the halter. She moved stiffly like she didn't really know she was walking, and tied her to the fence post so she wouldn't wander. The hum stopped as soon as I touched the gate. Everything went quiet again. No wind, no cows. Piper froze, ears straight up, eyes locked on the cottonwoods. I scanned the tree line. Thought maybe someone was out there, trespassers, hunters, maybe even drones again. But there was nothing. Just trees, still as death. I walked Fern back to the barn later that morning. She didn't seem scared or hurt, just tired, like she'd run 10 miles in her head. She ate, drank, acted normal the rest of the day. But her eyes never quite went back to normal. She stopped blinking as often, kept turning her head to the sky like she was waiting for something to come back. That night, I left Piper in the house. She refused to go out again. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee around 10 p.m., just watching the horizon. There was a light, faint and high up, moving in a slow circle. Not flashing, just gliding. It faded after a few minutes, and I didn't see it again. 2 mornings later, I found a patch of scorched grass near the fence where Fern had been. Not burned, exactly, just dried and colorless, like it'd been microwaved. The grass around it was untouched. She never stood in that corner again. Neither did any of the others. I'd been driving since noon that day, trying to get from Sandpoint to Missoula without stopping, but by the time I passed Thompson Falls, my eyes were starting to burn and my back felt locked up. I figured I'd pull over somewhere quiet for a quick nap and push through the rest after. It was late September and the nights had started getting colder, especially out that way, so I parked on a gravel pull-off about a mile past where Route 200 splits near the power station. There weren't any other cars. No lights except for the moon behind a thin layer of cloud. I shut the engine off, cracked the window an inch, and pulled my hoodie over my head. I don't remember falling asleep. What I do remember is waking up to silence. No wind, no rustling trees, no bugs, just a kind of heavy stillness that made my chest feel tight. The first thing that threw me was that I was facing west. I'd parked pointing east, away from the road, nose toward the trees. But when I opened my eyes, the windshield showed the shoulder and the guardrail. My headlights were off. So was the dash. And my phone, which I'd left charging in the center console, was completely dead. I sat there a second, trying to figure out if I just turned around in my sleep somehow, maybe gotten up to pee and forgotten, but there was no memory of moving. I checked the ignition. The keys were still in it, but the engine was off, like it had never been started. Then I saw the clock. It was 4:17 a.m. I'd pulled over just after 1. I'm not a heavy sleeper. I've never been able to nap more than 20-30 minutes in a car, even when I'm dead tired. 3 hours felt wrong. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. My breath fogged up right away, and the gravel under my boots crunched louder than I expected. The moon was still up but covered, casting everything in this flat, washed-out gray. I looked around, half expecting to see tracks or some sign that I'd turned around manually. Tire marks, maybe. But the ground was undisturbed. Just a wide semicircle of pressed gravel where my car had been, now sitting perfectly aligned in the opposite direction. I walked to the back of the car and looked at the license plate just to convince myself it was my car. It was. Montana plate, a little scrape on the bumper from when I backed into a rock in Glacier last summer. The driver's side door had a faint handprint on the glass, too small to be mine. I got back in and tried the ignition. Nothing. No crank, no click. I pressed the hazards. Radio. Dead. I turned the phone over and tried holding the power button again. Still nothing. At this point, I was wide awake. Something was off, way off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. There was no pain, no signs I'd been drugged or moved, just this awful feeling that something had happened around me while I was asleep. I decided to wait until daylight before trying to walk. I had a flashlight in the glove box, but the last thing I wanted was to go wandering down a highway in the dark with no signal, no working car, and no clue what direction I was actually facing anymore. So I sat, and somewhere around 4:40, I saw the lights. They weren't headlights, not flashlights either. They were in the sky, low, maybe just above the tree line, maybe higher. It was hard to tell. At first, I thought it was one light, just faint and flickering. But after a minute, I realized it was a group of them, arranged in a wide arc. Not blinking, not moving fast, just drifting slowly from left to right, like a curve of soft white lights being pulled on a string. They didn't make a sound, not even a buzz. And then they stopped, hung there, motionless. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel, half hoping it was just a weird plane pattern, or maybe drones. But they didn't move like anything mechanical. It was too fluid, too perfectly smooth. The arc bent slightly. It wasn't a curve anymore. It was shifting, forming a kind of straight edge, then another. Within a few seconds, it looked like a triangle, but not a solid one. Just the 3 corners marked by lights, and the rest filled in by shadow. Or maybe not shadow. Maybe it was just there, and I couldn't see it, like my eyes refused to process the shape properly. I don't know how long it stayed there. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Then, just like that, it folded in on itself. That's the only way I can describe it. One of the points pulled inward, the rest followed, and the whole thing seemed to shrink and collapse into nothing, like a piece of paper sucked into a drain. No sound, no flash, just gone. I sat there frozen, not sure whether to start the car, which still wouldn't work, or run. My mouth was dry and I felt this weird static in my teeth, like when you press your tongue to a battery. When the sky started lightening up around 6, I finally got out and walked toward the road. It took about an hour and a half before someone stopped. Older guy in a cattle truck headed west. He gave me a jump. The car started like nothing was wrong. Clock had reset to 12. Phone turned on too. Battery at 93%. No missed calls. No signs I'd been gone. But the odometer showed 6 extra miles. I hadn't moved. I was working the overnight shift at WNLR, a small local radio station somewhere on the Oregon coast. The studio was this cramped little room on the second floor of an old building downtown, with peeling paint and a view of the harbor lights flickering through the fog. It was the kind of place where you could almost forget time existed. The clock on the wall ticked loud, and the only other sounds were the static hum of the equipment and the occasional horn from a ship out on the water. My name's Daniel, everyone just calls me Dan, and I'd been doing these late night shows for a couple years by then. The hours sucked, but the pay was decent, and I liked the quiet. Usually I'd play a mix of classic rock, some blues, and whatever weird local stuff people sent in. I'd talk a little between songs, read some weather updates, and sometimes run requests if anyone called. One night in early November, a thick fog rolled in early. You could almost taste the moisture in the air, and the usual sound of waves crashing against the docks was muffled. I was halfway through a set when the phone rang. It wasn't unusual for people to call in with song requests or shout-outs, so I hit the button to answer without looking at the caller ID. WNLR. You're live with Dan, I said, expecting the usual. Silence. Then this weird clicking sound started. Sharp, repetitive, like Morse code but off rhythm, almost mechanical. It lasted for exactly 7 seconds, then the line went dead. No one spoke, no background noise, just that clicking. I frowned and looked over at the caller ID screen. It showed something strange. An unlisted number, and the location? Pacific Ocean. I blinked and checked it again, thinking it was a glitch or a prank. But the screen didn't change. I tried calling back, but the number was unreachable. At first, I laughed it off, probably some technical hiccup or a prank caller messing with the system. I went back to playing the next song, but that clicking stuck in my head. It felt deliberate, like someone was trying to communicate in a way I wasn't getting. The rest of the shift passed quietly. No other calls, no weird noises on the radio feed. But when I got home, I started digging through old logs and the station's call records from the past few weeks. Nothing else like that showed up, just a bunch of normal calls from local people. The next night, I was back on air, still thinking about the call. Around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't expect it to be the same number, probably just another late-night caller, but I glanced at the screen. The same unlisted Pacific Ocean number. I hesitated, but answered. Same thing. No voice, just that clicking noise for exactly 7 seconds, then silence. This time, I muted the mic and listened closely. The clicking didn't sound random anymore. It had a pattern, like a code of some kind. But I didn't know Morse code well enough to translate it on the fly, and honestly, it sounded almost wrong. Off-tempo, skipping beats, like a broken signal. I ran a quick search on my phone for the number, thinking maybe it belonged to some research vessel or something, but nothing matched. No boats or ships with that number, no official records, just a blank. By the third night, I started feeling uneasy. The fog outside was thicker than ever, and the studio's old windows rattled with the cold wind. I told my boss about the calls, but he brushed it off as a technical error. I was alone in the building most nights anyway, so there was no one to confirm what I was hearing. On the fourth night, I decided to record the call. When the phone rang, same number, same clicking. I hit record and let it run through. Then I played it back, slowed it down on my computer, trying to catch a pattern. The clicks were the same each time, but every playback sounded a little different, like the sound was warping or glitching. I noticed something else too. Around the time the call ended, my equipment would glitch. Lights on the mixer flickering, static crackling over the speakers, and the clock on the wall would jump ahead by a couple of seconds, like time was skipping. It was subtle, but it happened every time the call came in, like the call was interfering with the station's electronics. I started to dread the calls, not because they scared me outright, but because they felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Like there was something just beyond reach, something strange sitting out there in the ocean or the airwaves. One night, when I was about to hang up after the call ended, I caught movement outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the fog and the streetlights, but it didn't look right. It was too fluid, too slow to be a person or an animal, almost like a ripple in the air. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The movement was gone. After that, I started noticing other weird things. The radio signal would warp at random, cutting out for brief moments before snapping back. Sometimes the whole room would feel cold, like the fog had crept inside. I mentioned it to my friend Leah, who worked nights at a weather station across town. She said she'd been seeing strange blips on their radar over the ocean around the same time every night. Blips that didn't match any known aircraft or ships. We compared notes, and neither of us could explain what was happening. Eventually, the calls stopped. No more clicking, no more glitches, no strange movements outside the window. But the fog stayed. I kept thinking about that number, the calls, the sounds, the glitches, and how something out there might be trying to reach us, or maybe just messing with the signals. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I don't know if I want to, but I still keep a recording of that 7-second click, just in case it ever means something. The place where I work as a night security guard is this old, mostly abandoned airfield on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, Montana. Not much flying goes on anymore, just a handful of small planes now and then, mostly private pilots or crop dusters in the summer. The rest of the airfield is just empty runways, cracked pavement, and hangars slowly rusting away. The company I work for is contracted to watch over the place, make sure no one's sneaking around after hours. I usually do the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift alone, except for my German Shepherd, Juno. She's my companion and backup, always alert, and she hates the cold as much as I do. The nights around here in early October get cold fast, and the airfield feels especially empty and exposed, the kind of place where even your own footsteps sound strange. One night around 5:30 a.m., I was going through the last round of my usual checks. It was a foggy morning. The kind where the mist sticks close to the ground and swallows up the runway lights. You couldn't see much past the end of the runway itself, and the whole place felt even more isolated than usual. I was in the control tower, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the security monitors. Most cameras were just showing empty asphalt and dead grass, but there's this one camera that points down the longest runway, a spot where planes usually take off. The camera is mounted on a pole about 20 feet up, giving a wide shot of the concrete. I was about to check the time on my watch when something caught my eye on that screen. There was a faint shape sitting on the runway about halfway down. I blinked, leaned closer. It was dark, kind of like a shadow, but the shape was weird, too round and smooth to be a car or a piece of trash. It didn't look like any plane I'd seen around here. I switched the camera feed to full screen, zoomed in as much as I could. The shape was still there. No lights, no movement. Just this dark silhouette sitting there on the cold runway. I felt a chill even though the room was warm. Juno, sitting by my feet, stiffened and growled softly. That was odd. She's usually calm at work unless there's something really wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and coat, decided to check it out in person. The fog was thick as I stepped outside, and the air smelled like damp earth and old fuel. I called Juno, and she came right away, tail down but ears perked. As I walked toward the runway, the shape seemed to get bigger in the distance. I kept telling myself it was probably some old equipment, or maybe one of those weather balloons or something. When I got closer, the fog thinned just enough that I could see it clearer. It was definitely not a plane, car, or any machine I recognized. The thing was low to the ground, about the size of a small van, but its surface looked strange. Matte black, almost like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. No markings, no lights, nothing that made sense. I stopped maybe 30 feet away, shining my flashlight at it. The beam didn't reflect the way it should. It was like the object swallowed the light. Juno stayed close, but didn't growl anymore, just stared. I pulled out my phone, thinking to snap a picture, but the screen went black. Dead. No signal, no power. Weird, but I thought it might be the cold messing with the battery. I took a step back, and as I did, the thing just disappeared. No sound, no flash, just gone. I blinked, looked around, but the runway was empty again, just cracked concrete and fog drifting. I stood there a minute longer, heart racing, then called it in to dispatch, but the radio was dead too. I told them I'd keep an eye on things, then headed back to the tower. Once inside, I checked the security footage from that camera, hoping to catch whatever it was on tape. That's when I noticed something else. The footage from exactly 5:32 a.m. to 5:33 a.m., the time when I was outside, was completely corrupted. The video cut out, just static and glitching pixels, like a chunk of the file was missing. Every other camera's footage was fine, but this one had a perfect, uninterrupted glitch. I downloaded the clip, thinking it might be a tech error, but the corruption didn't look random. It looked like it was deliberately scrambled. I ran the file through recovery software. The program tried, but all I got was scrambled, distorted frames. No recognizable shapes, no movement, just weird pixel patterns. I showed it to my supervisor, who just shrugged and said, "Old equipment can be weird, maybe a faulty cable or interference." But that morning, after that happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was on the runway wasn't just some piece of forgotten junk. I checked the area the next day in daylight. Nothing unusual, no tire tracks, no footprints, no signs, anything had been there. Juno refused to go near that part of the runway, growling low if I tried to get her closer. I kept watching the footage every day after work, hoping for a hint, but that 1-minute glitch was always there. Exact, consistent, and frustratingly blank. Weeks passed with no sign of anything similar. No lights, no strange shapes, no more signal problems. Sometimes at night when the fog rolls in thick, I swear I see a dark shape far down the runway, just at the edge of visibility. I check the cameras, but that glitchy gap always stays. And Juno? She still won't step near that part of the airfield. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why the footage got corrupted exactly then. But every now and then I think about that silent, dark shape sitting there in the fog before disappearing, like it was never meant to be caught on camera at all. I'd been driving all afternoon, trying to get out of the city and into the country before dark. The traffic had been terrible, and honestly, I was wiped. It was one of those stretches on Route 39 where it's just trees on either side, nothing but dense woods and maybe the occasional farmhouse that looked long abandoned. I wasn't in a hurry anymore, so I figured I'd pull over, rest my eyes for a bit. There was a little turnout just off the road, barely big enough for 1 or 2 cars. I pulled in, killed the headlights, but left the engine running. That way the heater would keep me warm. It was mid-October, cold enough that the heat was necessary but not freezing yet. The sky outside was overcast, kind of that dull gray that makes everything look a little drained. Perfect for a nap, I thought. I reclined the driver's seat back, closed my eyes, and tried to clear my mind. Next thing I know, I'm waking up. The engine is still humming. The dashboard clock says 9:42 p.m., except I have zero memory of actually falling asleep. 1 minute I was sitting there thinking about pulling over, the next it's pitch dark and way later than I thought. It's like I blinked, and time just jumped ahead by a couple hours. I checked my phone right away. The lock screen showed the time and it matched the clock on the dash. No problem there. But then I opened the call history. Nothing. No outgoing calls, no missed calls, no incoming calls. Completely wiped clean. That struck me as weird because I'd been on the phone earlier that afternoon. I remember clearly. I talked to my sister, left a voicemail for my boss, even called the mechanic to confirm my appointment next week. All of that should have shown up in my call log, but it was all gone. I sat up straighter and looked out the window. The woods were thick and quiet. No streetlights, no other cars. Just the faint outline of the trees against the dark sky. I tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping in and restarted the phone. No change. The call history was blank. Then I noticed something else. My GPS app wasn't responding. It kept freezing on the loading screen, like it couldn't get a satellite signal. But that stretch of Route 39 is normally covered pretty well. I glanced back at the clock on the dashboard. It was the same as the phone's time, but I had no idea what time it was before I pulled over, so I had no baseline to compare to. Trying to piece it all together, I figured maybe I'd just been more exhausted than I thought. Maybe I drifted off, slept for a couple hours, and when I woke up, the phone glitched and lost all its data. It wasn't impossible. Still, I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the cold night air, stretching and shaking off the stiffness. The forest around me felt different, though. Like, the trees weren't just quiet, but almost waiting. I walked around the turnout and stared back at the road. There was no other traffic. Not a single car passed the whole time I was there. I tried to call someone on my phone, my sister, my friend Carlos, but the calls wouldn't connect. It said no service. That was another red flag. I'd just been on the phone hours ago. How could I have lost signal so suddenly in the middle of nowhere? I started feeling uneasy. I went back to the car and turned off the engine, planning to head inside the small diner a mile down the road. But when I reached over to turn the key, the engine sputtered but stayed on. The key was still in the ignition, but it was like the car was stuck halfway between on and off. The radio was playing static faintly in the background. I took the key out and put it back in, but the engine never fully shut off. I remember that well. There was a weird buzzing feeling in my chest, like the car was humming in a way it shouldn't. I locked the doors and sat back, trying to calm down. Then I noticed the rearview mirror. There was a faint glow behind the car, just beyond the edge of the turnout. I swung the door open and stepped out again, the cold hitting me like a wall. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. The glow wasn't from headlights or a flashlight. It was low to the ground, almost like the soft pulse of a lantern, but a pale blue color that didn't seem natural. I scanned the tree line and saw nothing. No headlights, no figures. I stared a little longer and then it blinked out, just like that. I felt my heart speed up. I got back in the car and locked the doors again. The silence was thick, no radio static, no engine noise. The car's dashboard was dead, everything powered off completely this time. I pulled my phone out again. The screen was back to normal, the call history restored. Calls from earlier that day were there again, as if nothing had ever changed. My GPS worked too. It was 11:43 p.m., 2 hours later than before. I tried calling my sister again. This time it connected. I told her what happened, but she sounded half asleep, said she didn't know what to make of it. Driving back, the road was empty, the woods on either side just trees, nothing strange. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that blue glow again. It never came. Back home, I checked the car and the phone thoroughly. No problems. Everything worked fine. But I can't shake the feeling that something happened during those missing 2 hours. Something that shouldn't have. The fact that the engine was still running when I woke up, the call log vanishing and then reappearing, that weird blue light that wasn't a light at all. I've driven that road dozens of times alone at night. Nothing like this ever happened before. And I don't know what to make of it. I was sitting out on my porch just after sunset, the kind of slow, orange-pink dusk that spreads over the neighborhood in early September. It was one of those evenings where the air still felt warm, but had a dry edge, and a few kids were playing down the street. I'd been outside with my phone, mostly scrolling through some news, but I wasn't really paying attention. My dog, a lean, wiry mutt named Rufus, was lying beside me, his nose twitching in the breeze. I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen, just a normal evening winding down after a long day at the garage. But then I noticed this shape in the sky, almost directly above the trees lining my backyard. At first, I thought it was a drone, or maybe a small plane because it was moving slow and steady, but the shape didn't make sense. It was dark, kind of angular, and it wasn't blinking like an airplane's lights do. It also didn't have any navigation lights at all. I pulled out my phone to try and take a picture. I wasn't even sure why. I guess part of me thought I might be imagining things. The shape hovered there, silent, almost unmoving, just a little wobble here and there like it was hanging in place. I tapped the screen to open the camera, aimed it upward, and started snapping pictures. I took about 5 shots over the next minute or so, adjusting the focus a little. Rufus got up and started growling low, looking toward the woods beyond my yard. I thought maybe it was just a raccoon or something, but then the shape in the sky changed. It shifted from this dark, rigid-looking form to a more amorphous, almost liquid-like glow. It wasn't bright, just faintly shimmering like a weird kind of haze or heat shimmer. Then it started to pulse, like it was breathing light. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up and I felt this weird pressure in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, more like intense confusion. I kept trying to take pictures, but the phone kept freezing for a second every time I tapped the shutter. After a few more moments, it suddenly vanished. Just gone. No sound, no flash, nothing. The sky was empty again, except for the usual stars coming out. I went inside, my heart still pounding, and grabbed my phone to look at the pictures. But none of them were there. I mean, the camera app was open, but when I went to the gallery, it was empty. Not just the photos I took, but everything. Like the whole camera roll was wiped clean. I swiped around, tried restarting the app, but nothing changed. The weirdest part was my battery. It was sitting at 12% when I first noticed the shape. Now it was at 3%. I didn't have any other apps running except some music, and the screen time was minimal. I didn't get any warning about low memory or anything either. I plugged the phone in right away and sat down at the kitchen table. Rufus was pacing, clearly unsettled. I kept looking outside, but nothing else happened. The streetlights flickered a little, and a car drove by, but that was it. I spent the next hour trying to figure out what had just happened. I checked my phone's storage and settings, even restarted it. No sign of the pictures or any system errors. Later, I texted a friend who's into tech stuff, and he said sometimes weird bugs or glitches can cause temporary freezes or drain the battery fast. But that didn't explain the empty gallery or the strange light I saw. I didn't tell my wife about it that night, but the next morning I told her everything. She said everything. She said maybe I was tired or stressed, but I knew what I'd seen. A couple of nights later, I went back out to the porch around the same time. Binoculars in hand this time, hoping to catch whatever that thing was again. I didn't see it, but Rufus kept looking toward the woods and growling softly every once in a while. The air felt heavier, like it was charged with something I couldn't put into words. I don't know if anyone else saw anything that night, and honestly, I'm not even sure what to make of it myself. But whenever I look up now, especially during that same time of day, I keep expecting to see that strange shape or feel that odd pressure again. It's like it left something behind in the air, and I'm still waiting for it to show up. I haven't tried taking pictures again since, not sure if I even want to. I was driving my rig down Interstate 40, just outside Albuquerque, around midnight. The road was mostly empty, the kind of quiet that feels like the whole world's gone to sleep, except for the few of us still hauling freight across the country. I'd been on the road since early afternoon, with maybe 2 hours left before my planned stop at the Mesa Vista rest area, a tiny pullout with a couple of picnic tables and a gas station that's open 24/7. It was a chilly fall night, the sky clear but dark enough that the stars were sharp points, almost too bright compared to the yellow sodium street lamps at the rest stop. I'd been driving for hours and figured I'd take a break to stretch and grab a coffee. So I pulled in, parked my rig in the far corner, and leaned back for a moment, just looking up. That's when I noticed it. Right above the rest stop, maybe 200 feet up, was this shape, dark, really dark, like a shadow against the black sky. It was hard to tell what it was at first. No lights, no blinking markers, no tail or wings. It was roughly the size of a small plane, but it wasn't moving like one. It was just spinning, slowly like a lazy top, rotating in place. No noise either. No engine hum, no wind noise, nothing. just hanging there, turning on its axis. I blinked a few times, wondering if I was imagining it. I looked around, but the lot was empty except for a couple of other trucks and a few cars at the gas pumps. No one else was outside looking up. The place was dead quiet, save for the faint hum of the gas station's fridge and the occasional rustle of dry leaves in the light breeze. I pulled out my phone to get a better look, but the screen wouldn't focus right on the object. The camera kept trying to autofocus, but the shape stayed blurry, like it didn't want to be caught on video. I called my buddy Darren on the radio. He was parked a few miles up the highway. Told him to check out the sky if he could. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. I even called the station that tracks the highway radar just to see if anything was flying in the area. The guy there said nothing unusual. No aircraft or drones registered overhead. I kept watching it for maybe 10 minutes. The rotation was steady, slow, almost hypnotic. I thought it might be a weather balloon at first, but it was too perfectly round and the spin was constant, no drifting with the wind. Then I noticed something else. The shape seemed to change slightly as it spun. It wasn't a perfect circle or a simple shape. It looked like it had flat panels that caught the faint glow from the rest stoplights and the stars, but no real reflection, just a dull, matte black surface. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I figured maybe it was some kind of experimental aircraft or military test, but the lack of lights and sound didn't add up. After a while, I walked over to the edge of the parking lot, hoping to get a better angle. Dottie, my dog, came with me. She was usually calm, but tonight she kept staring up with her ears pinned back, low growl rolling out every time the shape completed another rotation. I didn't hear anything unusual beyond the normal night sounds, but I swear the air felt different, thicker, like when you're underwater and everything muffles down. My phone battery was draining fast, and even with the screen brightness up, the camera still wouldn't capture a clear image. A few times I thought I heard a faint humming, but it never lasted. Just quick, flickering sounds that could have been the wind or a car passing miles away. I was debating whether to call the police or some aviation authority when the shape just vanished. 1 second it was there, spinning slowly like some kind of strange black windmill, and the next it was gone. No flicker, no fading out, just gone. I looked around, but nothing else seemed out of place. No headlights, no other aircraft, no blinking radar towers. Dottie whimpered and tugged at her leash like she wanted to leave, and I didn't blame her. I got back in my truck and sat there for a good half hour, watching the sky through the windshield, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. When I finally pulled back onto the highway, I called Darren again, and this time he picked up. Asked if I'd seen anything weird. I told him about the shape. He laughed and said, "You're messing with me." I checked my phone for messages and missed calls, but there were none. No alerts about anything unusual. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching me. Not from the road, not from the trucks around me, just watching. Like that dark shape was still out there somewhere, spinning slowly in the sky, waiting. The rest stop wasn't marked on any map as a military or government property. It was just a regular place, quiet and forgettable. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't even know if I want to. But every time I drive past Mesa Vista, I glance up at the sky and wonder if it's still up there, spinning in the dark. It was a Wednesday, early March. I'd just gotten home from work around 6:40 p.m., usual commute. I live in this small neighborhood in central Illinois, kind of a grid of one-story houses with big trees and quiet streets. It had rained earlier, so the ground was still wet, and the air had that smell like wet pavement and old leaves. The sky was this dull gray blue, still a little light out but fading fast. I was letting my dog, Penny, out into the backyard. She's a 7-year-old rescue mutt, some kind of shepherd mix with this big patch of white fur on her chest. She likes to sniff around the fence line before she does her business. I was just standing on the back steps, kind of zoning out, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up, and there was this plane. At least, that's what I thought it was at first. It had that long, narrow silhouette, with wings that stretched out flat and little blinking lights on either end. It was directly above the neighborhood, maybe 3 or 4 blocks to the west, maybe a couple 100 feet up. Not super high, but it wasn't moving. That was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't moving. Just completely still, like it had been paused mid-flight. No sound either, not even a low hum or distant engine noise. Everything else was quiet too. I remember that part clearly. No wind, no cars driving by, even the birds had gone quiet. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to do something, move forward, turn, rise, anything. But it just hovered there, totally motionless. It wasn't a helicopter, I know what those look like. This was shaped like a commercial jet, but smaller. Maybe like one of those private commuter planes. I watched it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes before pulling out my phone. I figured it was probably some kind of drone or weird angle, but I opened one of those flight tracker apps just out of curiosity. I zoomed in on my location, let it load. Nothing. No planes overhead, not within several miles actually. The nearest one was a cargo flight passing way south of us. I refreshed the app, still nothing. I even switched to another flight tracker, same thing. No planes, no aircraft of any kind near my house. By then, Penny had finished sniffing around and came back up the steps, but I didn't go inside. I just stood there staring up at this frozen plane. It had this weird light under it, not super bright, just this faint white glow, like a porch light seen through fog. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed on. I tried taking a video, but it didn't come out well. The phone couldn't focus right in the low light, and the zoom made everything blurry. All you could see was this little speck above the tree line. Nothing that'd convince anyone. After about 10 minutes, I went inside and got my binoculars from the hall closet. I've used them before at Cubs games, so they're decent, not super fancy, but good enough to see detail. When I looked through them, that's when I got really confused. It wasn't just hovering, it was dead still. No sway, no tilt, no indication of movement. I could see the shape clearer now. 2 wings, tail fin, small body. It didn't have any airline logos or markings I could make out. Just this flat gray color. Too big to be a drone, but too small for a major airline. No windows I could see either, just smooth. Around the 15-minute mark, it suddenly started moving. No sound, no shift, just it started gliding forward, slow at first, then faster. It headed north, climbed a little, and then faded into the clouds. It didn't accelerate like a jet taking off. It moved more like it was being pulled. No dip, no turbulence, just a perfect arc out of view. I stood there holding the binoculars for a while, just trying to process it. I felt this strange mix of unease and not fear exactly, but like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. Something out of step, like watching a glitch. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how quiet it had been and how nothing on the apps showed anything. I even checked archived radar data the next morning, trying to see if maybe there'd been a low-flying plane not picked up by the trackers. But there was nothing. I asked my neighbor Dan the next day if he'd noticed anything. He's retired, lives across the street, always out on his porch around sunset. He just kind of shrugged and said, "Thought I saw a helicopter or something, but didn't hear it, so figured I imagined it." That's all he said. I didn't push it. I kept thinking maybe it was some military thing, but we're nowhere near a base, and I've never seen anything like that around here before or since. Whatever it was, it didn't behave like anything I know. And the silence, that was the part that stuck with me the most. Not even the usual background noise, just dead still. It hasn't happened again. But now I catch myself looking up a lot more than I used to. I've been into drones for a few years now, mostly just flying my quadcopter around fields and parks near where I live in western Kansas. Nothing fancy, just a hobby to kill time on weekends. I'm not a professional or anything, but I enjoy the challenge of getting smooth shots and trying to map out patterns in the land from above. That Saturday was unusually warm for April, the kind of dry heat that sits heavy in the air even after the sun goes down. I decided to take my drone out late afternoon around 6 p.m. when the sun was low and the shadows stretched long across the fields. I figured the lighting would be good for some cool aerial shots. I loaded the drone into the back of my truck and drove out to a spot I'd been meaning to check for a while. a patch of farmland about 5 miles east of my place, just off a gravel county road. I'd heard some locals mention strange crop patterns around there, but I always thought it was just weird growth or normal farmer stuff. Nothing serious. When I got there, the field was just a big rectangular stretch of corn. The stalks were just starting to green up, but in one corner I noticed it looked different. There were patterns in the crop, almost geometric but uneven, like someone had pressed down the plants in wide arcs and circles. Nothing like the classic crop circles you hear about on the news, but still weird enough to catch my eye. I set up the drone, did a quick systems check, and launched it straight up. The controls were responsive, signal strong, and the camera feed crisp on my tablet. I flew it low over the crop field, aiming the camera down to catch the patterns from above. As I guided it closer to the strange part of the field, the feed started to glitch. Small flickers at first, like interference, but then the video froze for a moment and the drone's controls got sluggish. I thought maybe it was a glitch in the hardware or signal interference from something nearby. I tried moving the drone back toward me, but the controls felt delayed, like it was dragging behind. Then the screen went black for a second. The drone was still up there, but the feed was gone. No signal. I waited. Hit the reconnect button on the app a few times. Nothing. I called out loud, like that would help. Come on, buddy. Don't do this to me. The drone kept drifting over the crop patterns, out of sight behind a small rise at the edge of the field. I jumped in my truck and drove toward where it was last seen, hoping the signal would come back if I got closer. When I reached the edge of the field, I stepped out and looked around. The patterns stretched out before me in the fading light, those flattened arcs and circles. The air was still. No wind, no bird song, just this eerie quiet. I walked into the field, moving carefully so I wouldn't trample the plants. The dirt underfoot was dry and cracked. The patterns weren't smooth or perfect, more like someone had pressed down the stalks with their feet or a board, but there was no trail leading in or out, no footprints. I called for the drone again, hoping it'd buzz back to me on its own. Nothing. Suddenly there was this bright flash of light overhead. It was quick, like someone shone a massive flashlight straight down. Not from a plane or helicopter. No sound either, which was odd for something that bright. I blinked and looked up, but the sky was just a deep blue with the first stars coming out. No source for the light. It felt unnatural, like the kind of brightness you don't expect in a field late at night. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep looking around. The air felt heavier. The temperature seemed to drop. I shivered even though it wasn't cold before. After a few minutes, I checked my tablet again. The drone app was back online. The feed popped up with static at first, then cleared. The drone was hovering above the field, just outside the circle patterns, but the camera was pointing straight up, at the sky. I tapped to rotate the camera down. The feed flickered again, then suddenly cut to a bright white flash that filled the whole screen. It lasted maybe a second before the feed went dead again. I hit every button trying to reconnect, but it never came back. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The sun had almost completely set, and the field looked like a patchwork of black and green under the early stars. My skin prickled like I was being watched. Eventually, I packed up and left. The drone was gone. No signal, no GPS location. I called the manufacturer's support line the next day, but they said if it's out of range or powered down, there's no way to track it. I went back a few times in the following weeks, but the crop patterns were gone. The field was just normal corn again, evenly grown, no flattened circles, no strange arcs. And the drone? It showed up in the mail about a month later. No note, no package slip, just my quadcopter in the original box with the battery fully drained. I plugged it in, powered it up, and reviewed the last saved videos. The only thing saved was a few seconds of static, then that sudden flash of light from the sky. Nothing else. I still don't know what happened that night, or why the drone lost signal right over those patterns, or where it went for that whole month before showing up at my door. All I know is that field, those patterns, and that light didn't fit anything I understand. And I've stopped going out there. I woke up a little after 5 because my dog started whining. She sleeps at the foot of the bed and usually doesn't make a sound unless she needs to go out. She's older, so I figured it was just her bladder, and I got up without thinking much about it. When I slid the back door open, she stopped short, just stood there, staring at the yard. I gave her a little nudge, but she wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed the smell. Not strong, but sharp, like burnt plastic or something electrical. I stepped out onto the porch barefoot, thinking maybe the neighbors had burned something in a fire pit the night before. But the smell didn't seem to be coming from anywhere in particular. Then I saw the dust. It was pitch black, not like dirt or mulch or even ash. It looked like someone had sprinkled charcoal powder all over the yard. It was mostly in the center, covering maybe a 10-foot circle, but there were lighter streaks closer to the house. The porch steps had faint smudges like someone with soot on their shoes had walked up and then disappeared. I bent down and touched it. It was dry, fine, and clung to my fingers. No moisture, no grit, just black powder. I checked the sky. It was overcast, barely light out. No smoke, no clouds moving fast, just still and quiet. Too quiet, actually. There were no birds. Usually there's a few chirping in the trees by then, but the whole yard was dead silent. I tried calling the dog again, but she backed away and hid behind the door frame. She's never done that before, not even during thunderstorms. I ended up just standing out there for a while, looking around, trying to figure out where it could have come from. It didn't make sense. I live in the suburbs, no factories nearby, no construction crews, nothing that would dump that kind of material. And if it was from a fire or something, there would have been ash flakes, maybe some kind of scent. But this was different. Too fine, too uniform, like it had been laid down carefully. Around 6, I got my phone and took a few pictures. The dust didn't show up well in the camera unless I angled it right, but you could make out the contrast in the grass where it thinned out. I sent a photo to my friend Jenna, who works mornings, and asked if she'd ever seen something like it. She didn't answer right away, so I just made some coffee and kept checking through the blinds every so often. By 8:30, the yard was clean. I mean completely, like it had never been there. No black powder, no smudges on the porch. The grass was normal color, no dead patches or burn marks. Even the smell was gone. I went out and stood in the same spot, squinting at the ground, but it was just plain grass. The weirdest part was the porch steps. I had seen those smudges earlier. I remembered thinking I'd need to wipe them down, but now there was nothing, no trace. The dog still wouldn't go out. I tried tossing her ball, even her leash, to see if she'd perk up, but she wouldn't step past the threshold. She kept sniffing the air and pacing. She wouldn't drink from her outside bowl either. I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I imagined it through sleep haze or something, but the pictures were still on my phone. One of them even had a clear boot print in the dust, mine from earlier. I stood in the same spot and held my foot up next to it, but the ground didn't look any different. It was like someone had cleaned it up with tweezers. I didn't really want to go back to sleep after that. I just sat on the couch with my laptop and looked up stuff about black powder in yards. The closest thing I found was about volcanic ash fallout, but we're nowhere near anything like that. Everything else was just guesses. Mildew, mold, pollution, but none of it matched what I saw, and nothing explained how it could vanish in a couple hours. Around 11, Jenna texted back and said it was probably a busted transformer nearby or maybe a blown-up firework. She said she'd seen something like it once after a substation blew during a storm. But we hadn't had any storms, and I didn't hear anything loud during the night. Plus, there weren't any power outages. My clocks were all normal. I kept checking the yard throughout the day. It stayed clean. The dog eventually went out in the afternoon to pee, but she tiptoed to the very edge of the porch and did it on the gravel. Wouldn't go near the grass. I even tried walking across it barefoot again to see if it felt different. It didn't. Just cool, slightly damp in the shade. Normal. That night, I sat outside on the steps for a while with the porch light off, just trying to get a feel for it. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt weird, like I was waiting for something. The neighborhood was quiet. A couple cars passed in the distance. I could hear someone's wind chimes a few houses down, but my yard stayed completely still. No wind, no bugs, no motion. Even the trees didn't sway. I remember watching a plane fly overhead, just a regular one, blinking slowly across the sky, and wondering if it had anything to do with what happened. I couldn't explain why. It didn't feel related, but it also kind of did. That feeling like you're missing a connection just out of reach. A little after 10, I thought I saw a flicker of light over the fence. Just for a second, like someone flashing a small mirror from a distance. I stood up, thinking it might be a flashlight or someone in the woods behind the yard, but it didn't come back. I waited maybe 15 minutes before going inside. The next morning, the dog barked at the sliding door again. Not whining this time, actually barking. When I checked, there was nothing outside. The yard looked the same, but she refused to go near the door for the rest of the day. A few days later, I tried showing the pictures to a friend who works in environmental testing. He looked at them for a while and then said it might have been some kind of industrial dust blown in from the highway. I didn't argue, but it didn't sit right. The coverage was too clean, and the fact that it disappeared like that, with no wind or rain, just didn't make sense. I still walk the yard now and then looking for any sign it happened at all. The grass is healthy. No discoloration, no burn rings, no new growth or dead spots. But the dog never touches it anymore. She sticks to the patio or does her business out front. I haven't brought it up to the neighbors. I'm not really sure what I'd say. Every once in a while, I check the pictures again. They look kind of blurry now, like the black powder doesn't show up as clearly as I remember, but the boot print is still there. Same tread pattern as my hiking boots. I haven't cleaned the porch since. I just want to see if anything ever comes back. I was about 10 when it happened, and for a long time I thought I just imagined the whole thing. I was out in the field behind our house one evening, right around dusk, flying a kite. The sky was that soft, fading blue you get just before the sun disappears, and there wasn't a breeze worth mentioning. I remember thinking it was weird that the kite even stayed up at all. The kite was one of those simple, diamond-shaped ones with a bright red tail. I'd been trying to get it to fly higher for a while, but it mostly just bobbed awkwardly a few feet above me. I had the string wound tight around a little plastic spool, holding on with both hands because I didn't want to lose it. Then, all of a sudden, the string jerked upward hard. I mean, it wasn't like the wind catching it or the kite pulling gently. The string pulled straight up out of my hands, like something invisible grabbed it and yanked it skyward in a straight line. I felt my fingers slip on the spool, but I couldn't let go because I was so shocked. The string went tight, perfectly vertical, and the kite shot up faster than I could track with my eyes. It didn't flap or twist or anything, just shot straight up like it was being reeled in by a machine above the clouds. I remember looking up as far as I could and seeing the kite as a little dot way up there, moving like it was being pulled by a string too tight for the sky. Then, just like that, the string slackened and dropped back down. The kite disappeared from sight, and the string fell limp in my hands. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it felt much longer. After I pulled myself together, I went looking for the kite. It wasn't in the field anymore. I ended up finding it a few yards away, caught in the branches of a tall tree near the edge of the woods. The kite was shredded, the fabric torn in jagged strips, the frame bent and broken. The weird part was that there wasn't a breeze to speak of the whole evening. The weather report the next day said the wind speed was 0 for hours before and after the event, so nothing that could have blown the kite into the tree with that kind of force. I told my parents, but they thought I was just making it up or got tangled in the string and fell or something. They joked about the mysterious kite monster, but I knew what I saw. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing these faint sounds outside, like soft rustling in the trees. I'd glance out the window, but it was just the normal shadows of branches moving, nothing out of place. Still, the noise didn't feel natural. It was too quiet to be an animal moving around, but it wasn't the wind either. Just a subtle, persistent shifting sound, almost like breathing. The next day, I went back to the tree where the kite was caught. The shredded pieces still hung there, fluttering slightly in the sun. I looked around the ground and noticed something odd. There were no footprints or any signs someone else had been there. I'd have thought maybe a kid climbed the tree or someone else grabbed the kite, but nothing. No footprints in the dirt or grass, no broken branches leading to the spot, nothing that made sense. Over the next week, I kept going back to that field, sometimes just standing there with the spool in my hand, hoping maybe I'd see something else. But the kite never flew again. The sky was always calm, and I couldn't get the string to lift, no matter how hard I tried. One afternoon, while I was sitting on the porch, I noticed my dog staring hard into the woods near the tree. He was growling low, and his fur was standing up. But when I looked, nothing was there. No people, no animals, no movement, just trees and shadows. I started feeling like something was watching me when I was outside near that field, especially in the late afternoon or early evening. It wasn't a feeling like being spied on by a person, more like something just waiting silently, watching without moving. One evening, a few days after the kite incident, I was walking back from the field as the sun was going down. The sky was mostly clear, except for a few thin clouds near the horizon. I caught sight of a faint glimmer near the treetops, a pale light that didn't belong. It wasn't like a flashlight or a car. It hovered, almost pulsing softly, then faded out. That night, when I told my dad about it, he said I was seeing things because of the kite, that it was just my imagination running wild. But I wasn't imagining the string pulling straight up, or the kite disappearing so suddenly, or the dog's reaction. Something was off, but I couldn't explain what. I kept thinking about the kite, how it felt like it was pulled by something that wasn't there, and how, after it was gone, the world around that spot seemed quieter and emptier, like something had passed through and left a silence behind. Eventually, I stopped going to the field. The fear wasn't like the fear from a scary movie or a nightmare. It was quieter, just a heavy, slow unease that made me want to stay indoors after dark. Years later, I drove past that field and saw that the tree where the kite was caught had fallen in a storm. The shredded kite fabric was long gone, but the memory of that evening stuck with me. I never figured out what really pulled the string or why the kite ended up torn in that tree with no wind to explain it. I don't know if anyone else saw anything strange, and I never told anyone besides my family. Even now, I think about it sometimes, especially when I see a kite flying in the sky, perfectly still on a windless day. I was about 10 or 11 maybe, and it was a summer night when it happened. Nothing special at first, just me and my little brother out in the backyard, messing around with this cheap laser pointer Dad got me for Christmas. We weren't doing anything important, just shining it up at the sky, trying to hit the stars or clouds, seeing how far the little red dot could go before it disappeared. We'd been out there maybe half an hour, the kind of quiet evening where the crickets do their thing, and the occasional car goes by far off on the street. My brother was chasing fireflies, trying to catch them in his hands. I was more interested in the laser, pointing it randomly into the sky. At some point, I flicked the beam toward this thick patch of clouds hovering over the neighborhood. It was low and kind of blotchy, like it was hanging just a bit too close. When I pointed the laser at the clouds, I noticed this tiny flash way up there, like a light blinking. It wasn't far off, maybe just beyond the tree line behind our house. The light blinked twice, slow and deliberate, like someone was responding. I froze for a second, just watching it. The laser was still on, pointing right where the blinking happened. Then the light moved, slowly, smoothly, almost like it was gliding just above the trees, heading right over our house. I called my brother over, but he was too busy trying to catch bugs to care. I kept my eyes on the light as it drifted silently across the sky. No noise, nothing. It was just there, a little blinking shape moving against the dark clouds, which were lit faintly by the streetlights. It got directly over us, and I swear, for a moment, it was close enough I could have reached out and touched it if I was tall enough. The light didn't change color or flicker wildly. It just blinked twice more, slow and calm, like it was acknowledging me again. Then it started to disappear, sinking behind the clouds. I tried to keep the laser on it, but the beam hit the clouds and scattered. The blinking stopped completely, and after a minute or two, the cloud slowly shifted and the light was gone. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but the street was quiet. No cars, no people, just the occasional hoot hoot from an owl somewhere. I was kind of shaking a little, but didn't want to admit it. I called my brother over again and told him about it, but he just shrugged and went back to chasing bugs. Later, inside the house, I kept thinking about that light. I even tried to explain it to my parents, but they just smiled and said, I probably imagined it, or it was a plane. The weirdest thing was the next morning. I found little circles on the grass in the backyard about the size of a basketball, where the grass was flattened like something had been sitting there. My brother said he didn't notice anything when he was out there, and neither did Mom or Dad. I never told anyone about those circles. I'm not sure if they were from that night or something else, but combined with the blinking light and the way it moved, it just didn't feel normal. I tried looking up at the sky the next few nights, shining the laser pointer again, but nothing happened. No blinking, no lights, no signals. That night stayed with me, not because it was terrifying or anything, but because it didn't make sense. It was like something was out there watching or maybe even trying to talk, but not in words or sounds. Just these simple blinks, like a quiet acknowledgement. I still wonder what it was, drifting silently over our house, blinking twice, and then vanishing behind the clouds. I was out camping by myself on this clear summer night. I'd gone to this spot a few miles off the main road, where the trees thin out and you get a wide view of the sky. No lights around, just me and the quiet. I set up my tent and got a fire going before it got dark. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just wanted a night away from everything. After dinner, I sat on a log with a cold beer, just staring up at the stars. It was one of those nights where the sky feels vast and quiet, nothing but the sound of the fire crackling and some distant bugs. I always liked looking at stars when I camped. There's something about how steady they look, like they've been there forever. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed one star that didn't look right. It was toward the south, low on the horizon, and it seemed brighter than the others. At first, I thought it might just be a planet, like Venus or something. But over the next few minutes, it didn't just stay bright. It actually got brighter, slowly, like it was glowing more. The other stars stayed the same, but this one star grew until it was as bright as the moon. I know it sounds dumb to say, but it didn't have the shape or texture of the moon, just the same brightness. I kept squinting, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I watched it for about 10 minutes as it got brighter. And then, after reaching that peak, it started dimming back down, just as slowly. What was weirder was that as it dimmed, it started moving. Not fast, just a tiny bit to the east. It wasn't a plane or a satellite, those usually blink or move faster. This thing was steady and smooth, like something drifting. The way it moved didn't make sense to me, because stars don't move like that in minutes. I kept my eyes locked on it, feeling more and more uncomfortable. It was like the calm of the night had this layer of tension added underneath. I kept turning around, checking behind me, the woods, but there was nothing. No sounds beyond the usual, no signs of anyone else nearby. The fire started to die down, so I got up to poke it, thinking maybe I was getting too fixated on that light. When I looked back, the star was almost back to normal brightness, but the spot it had been in was empty, like it had moved off behind a thin layer of clouds or just out of sight. I stood there for a while longer, but nothing else happened. The sky went back to normal, stars steady and quiet like they always are. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong or watching me, but the sense of being alone somehow made it worse. I didn't sleep much that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I could still see that bright star slowly getting bigger, then fading, drifting just out of reach. In the morning, everything looked normal. The woods were quiet, the campfire ashes cold. I packed up and left, but that night stayed with me in a way I can't explain. I don't know what I saw or why it moved the way it did. All I know is that it wasn't just a star. I was driving home late one night on this stretch of highway I'd taken 100 times before. It's a flat road, nothing special, just fields on either side and a clear, open sky above. No hills, no cliffs, nothing that would make you think about altitude at all. I had the GPS on my dashboard just out of habit, even though I know the route by heart. I was coming back from a friend's place after a late dinner, tired but mostly just looking forward to getting home. The night was calm, the sky clear, and the road was empty except for a few other cars here and there. I wasn't in a hurry, just cruising along, headlights cutting through the dark. About halfway through the drive, I glanced down at the GPS like I usually do, just to check my progress. The map showed the road and my position, but then the altitude reading caught my eye. It jumped up, like way up. It said I was driving several hundred feet above sea level. That didn't make any sense. I was on that flat highway and I could see the horizon all around me. The landscape was completely level. I looked outside and everything was as normal as always. The sky was still clear, stars sharp and steady. No fog, no clouds, nothing that could mess with visibility. I checked the GPS again, thinking it must be a glitch. But the altitude reading stayed stuck high for maybe 10 seconds. Then it dropped back down to normal, right where it should be. I blinked, stared at the screen. The numbers didn't change again after that. It felt weird, like the GPS was showing me something I wasn't supposed to see. I thought maybe it was a software bug or a bad signal, but I'd never seen the altitude jump like that before on that exact stretch of road. I've used that GPS app a ton of times. And the thing is, the rest of the map was totally normal, just the altitude reading that was off. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept glancing at the screen, half expecting it to glitch again or show some other impossible reading. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The radio was acting weird. Static kept cutting in and out, even though I was tuned to a local station that usually comes in crystal clear. The signal was patchy, crackling like it was being interrupted. I reached up to adjust the antenna, but the signal didn't improve. Then the static turned into a low humming noise, almost like a tone or a pulse. It wasn't music or voices, just this steady hum that felt like it was vibrating through the car. I tried changing stations, but every one of them had that same humming underneath whatever was playing. The noise wasn't loud, but it was definitely there. It made me uncomfortable, like something was off with the whole environment. I rolled down the windows a bit to see if the noise was coming from outside, but the night was quiet, just the soft whoosh of the breeze and the faint rustle of leaves from the fields. That's when I started noticing small lights off to the side of the road. Nothing like headlights or street lamps, just faint, pale glows hovering above the fields. At first, I thought they were just farm equipment or distant buildings, but they didn't make sense. They didn't cast any real light or shadows. The glow was soft, kind of like little orbs floating just above the ground. They stayed still as I drove past, and then the next ones appeared further ahead. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, spaced out irregularly. I slowed down to get a better look, but the lights didn't change or blink. They just hovered silently, almost watching. It felt like the car was passing through some kind of boundary, like the world shifted, even if everything outside looked the same. I kept checking the GPS and the altitude reading again. It was normal now, steady like it should be. The radio humming faded too, replaced by static and then nothing at all. The quiet was so intense I could hear my own breathing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the strange lights disappeared. One moment they were there, and the next nothing but empty fields and darkness. The feeling didn't leave me though. I felt like I'd crossed into a place where the normal rules didn't apply. I checked the GPS one last time before pulling off the highway near a gas station. The screen showed the usual flat terrain and normal altitude again. The radio worked fine once I was stationary, no humming or static. But the whole time I was filling my tank, I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting something to show up. I don't know what happened that night. The GPS reading, the weird lights, the strange noise on the radio, it all just felt like pieces of something I couldn't quite understand. When I finally got home, everything was back to normal. But for a long time after, I kept thinking about those moments on that road. like I had been somewhere else for a few minutes without leaving the highway. I don't know if anyone else has had something like this happen, but it's stuck with me ever since. I woke up because my dog Max started growling. Low, quiet at first, but then more insistent, like something was really bothering him. I wasn't planning to get up, I figured he'd settle down after a bit, but the growling didn't stop. It felt off. So I sat up and rubbed my eyes, then glanced over toward the window by the bed. Max was standing stiff, staring straight at the glass. His hackles were up, lips curled back, and his growling turned into this weird, guttural rumble I'd never heard before. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and shuffled toward the window, heart already speeding up. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out. Outside was pitch black, but there were 5 little red lights hanging in the sky above the trees behind the house. They weren't blinking, not like airplane lights, just steady, glowing red. The formation was weird too, like a slightly stretched pentagon, and the whole thing was rotating very slowly, like maybe one full spin every couple of minutes, but it wasn't moving anywhere. Just hanging there, like it was watching the house. I blinked a couple times, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Max was still growling, eyes locked on those lights. I stepped back a little to get a better view from the hallway window, but it was the same. The lights were still there, still turning. I grabbed my phone to see if I could get a photo or video, but when I looked up again, 2 of the lights had disappeared. Just gone. I scanned around, but they didn't reappear anywhere else in the sky. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, they came back. All 5, back in the exact same spot, slowly rotating again. At this point, my head was pounding a little, and I felt cold even though I was inside. Max wouldn't stop growling or moving away from the window. Usually, he's the calm one. I swear he seemed tense, almost like he was afraid of whatever was out there. I called out to him softly, but he ignored me and kept watching. I thought about going outside to check, but that felt wrong. Like stepping outside would change something, so I stayed put, just watching those lights spin quietly in the dark. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights started to fade. Not like they turned off suddenly, but more like the glow dimmed, slowly at first, then quicker. When the last light blinked out, the sky went completely black again. No stars, no moon, nothing. Just dark. Max finally stopped growling and sat down, looking up at me like he wanted to know what I was doing. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, but I didn't see anything else. No sounds outside, no flashes or anything. Just the usual quiet with Max sleeping close by, still alert. The next morning, I told a couple neighbors about the lights, hoping someone else saw them. No one did. Not a word. The local weather was clear that night, no storms or planes reported. I tried to explain it away as some kind of weird drone or a prank with lights, but the slow rotation and how they disappeared and reappeared didn't make sense. And Max's reaction? He's never acted like that before. I still look up at that same spot in the sky sometimes, just in case. But nothing's ever been there since. I was out running late one night, like I usually do when everything's quiet and the streets are empty. It was around midnight, cool but not cold, and I had my usual gear: running shoes, shorts, a hoodie tied around my waist, and a little headlamp clipped to my belt. I don't always turn it on, but sometimes I like to have it ready just in case. I'd been following the same route for a while, a loop through some residential neighborhoods and a bit of a back road that cuts through a patch of woods. I like that part because it's dark, away from streetlights, and the only noises are usually the wind or maybe a few crickets. That night, about halfway through my run, I came to this stretch of road I'd run before a bunch of times. It's just a 2-lane road, nothing fancy, with trees on both sides. But when I stepped onto it this time, something was off. The whole road was glowing. Not bright, not like headlights or a neon sign, but a soft greenish light that seemed to cover everything. The asphalt, the trees, the grass on the shoulder. It was almost like someone had spread a thin layer of light over the whole area. The glow was subtle, kind of eerie, but it wasn't harsh or flashing. It just sat there, steady and quiet. I stopped for a second, blinking to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks. I turned my headlamp on, just a quick tap. The moment the light flicked on, the green glow vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. The road and trees went back to normal darkness, except for the beam of my headlamp. I turned the light off, and the greenish glow came back, slowly filling the road again. I tried it a couple of times, flicking the headlamp on and off, and every time the glow disappeared when the light was on, then came back once it was off. I wasn't sure what to make of it. It wasn't something I'd ever seen before. The road definitely didn't have any streetlights, and there weren't any houses or signs that could explain it. No cars around either, just that weird, faint green light. I slowed down to a walk, scanning the edges of the road where the glow touched the trees and grass. Everything looked normal, except for the color. No animals, no reflections, no fog, or anything else that could explain it. As I kept walking, the feeling started creeping up on me, like I was being watched, or maybe like something was just barely there, hidden in the dark around me. I looked up at the sky, which was clear and full of stars. No planes, no helicopters, just the usual quiet. Then I heard something, a soft rustling sound coming from the trees on my right. It wasn't loud, more like the leaves shifting, but it made me stop again. I turned my headlamp back on and swept the light through the woods, but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes, no shapes. I turned the light off again, just to check. The green glow returned, stronger this time, like it was responding to the darkness. I kept moving slowly, watching and listening. After a few minutes, the rustling sound came again, this time from the left side. I stopped and tried to focus. It wasn't regular animal sounds, no birds, no squirrels. It was too steady and deliberate, almost like something was moving carefully, making sure I noticed, but not getting too close. I started feeling uneasy, the kind of feeling you get when you realize you're not alone, but can't see what's around you. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, and I didn't want to turn my headlamp back on because the glow disappeared every time. I kept walking, trying to stay calm and keep my breathing steady. The road ahead was empty, but the green light made the shadows longer and more twisted than usual. After maybe 10 minutes, I reached a bend in the road where the trees opened up a little. The glow was brighter here, covering the whole clearing in that faint greenish light. I stopped again and looked around carefully. That's when I noticed something else. The air felt different. Not colder or warmer, just heavier. Like the space around me had thickened or was pressing in a little. I switched on my headlamp briefly, shining it around the clearing, but again, the light killed the glow. When I turned it off, the greenish light was back, and the air felt lighter again, but the heaviness stayed just under the surface, like a quiet weight. I started to jog again, wanting to get out of there, but the glow stayed with me as I moved down the road. The weird part was that the light didn't move. It stayed fixed to the road and the trees around it, like it was part of that place. At some point, I must have hit a spot where the glow ended. I don't know exactly where, but suddenly the greenish light just stopped, and I was back in normal darkness. I flicked my headlamp on and off a few times to be sure, but that part of the road was just like any other night. I checked my phone to see the time. I'd been on that stretch longer than I thought, almost 20 minutes. As I got closer to my car, the glow was completely gone. The streetlights near my neighborhood were back to their usual yellow-orange, and everything looked normal again. I kept looking back over my shoulder while I jogged home, half expecting to see that faint green light creeping after me, but there was nothing. When I got inside, I checked my watch and my phone to see if anything was weird with the time or GPS, but everything looked normal. I felt okay physically, but that strange feeling, like something unseen was still there, just out of sight, stuck with me for the rest of the night. I haven't been back to that part of the road since, and I still don't know what the green light was or what was moving in the woods. All I know is that sometimes when it's really dark and quiet, I swear I can almost see that glow again, just at the edge of my vision. We were hiking one afternoon, just a group of friends taking it easy on a trail near the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a way to kill time before summer really kicked in. The trail wasn't long or complicated, maybe a couple miles round trip, and we all knew each other from school, so it was pretty casual. At some point, I decided to take a quick detour off the path. Nothing big, just wanted to check out this spot I'd noticed earlier, a patch of moss and old tree roots that looked kind of cool. I told my friends I'd be right back, maybe 5 minutes tops, and they were fine with it. I figured I'd walk a little ways off the trail, take a few pictures, and then catch back up. But the weird thing is, when I turned back to find them, it felt like barely any time had passed. I mean, I'd only been gone for what I thought was 5 minutes, maybe less. The sun was still pretty high, the shadows hadn't moved much, and I wasn't even tired or thirsty. I called out a few times and eventually saw them a little ways down the trail, just standing there. They looked tense, like they were waiting for me, but not just waiting, like something was wrong. When I got up to them, the first thing I heard was Mike asking if I was okay. Then someone else said they were worried, that I'd been gone for almost 2 hours. I laughed it off at first. "No way," I said. "I was only gone a few minutes." They all looked at me like I was crazy. I checked my watch. The time hadn't jumped or anything. According to it, about 5 minutes had passed since I left the group. I told them that. They kept shaking their heads, insisting I couldn't have been gone that short because they'd been looking for me for almost 2 hours. That's when I noticed it. They looked worn out, like they'd been wandering for a long time. Clothes dirtier than when we started, faces a little scratched up. I was fine, not a scratch or a dirt smudge on me. Even my backpack was clean, like I hadn't been wandering through brush or anything. I asked them what happened while I was gone, and they said they kept walking down the trail, calling my name, turning back, pacing, getting lost in the woods. They told me how the path seemed to change, like the trees shifted around them, and the landmarks they'd seen before just disappeared. They said it felt like the trail stretched on forever, even though it shouldn't have. That's when it started to get weird for me, because the spot I'd gone to, where I'd been standing, was only a few hundred feet off the main trail, and I could see the trail itself from where I was. There was no way they could have gotten lost that badly or been wandering for 2 hours. The whole thing just didn't add up. I tried to suggest maybe they were exaggerating, maybe they lost track of time, but they were adamant. You could tell they really believed it. One of them mentioned hearing voices calling my name, but when they tried to follow, they never found where the sounds came from. They said the woods got too thick and the light started to fade, even though it was still early afternoon. We decided to head back, all of us together this time. I stuck close to the trail, keeping my eyes on familiar landmarks, but my friends kept glancing behind us like they thought something was following. I asked them about it, and they said they thought they saw something moving between the trees, just out of clear sight. They weren't sure if it was an animal or something else. The rest of the hike back was quiet. Everyone seemed jumpy. When we got out of the woods and back to the parking lot, I noticed my friends all had the same pale, tired look like they'd been through something rough. I felt okay, but a little shaken. I couldn't explain why. That night, I kept thinking about how the time we experienced didn't match up. 5 minutes for me, 2 hours for them, and the way the trail had changed for them, like it wasn't the same woods anymore. I checked my phone's location history the next day, and it showed my position staying around that spot for only a short while before moving back toward the parking lot. But my friends' phones had logs of walking in circles deeper into the forest for nearly 2 hours. I don't know what happened to them in those 2 hours. They don't really know either. They still get quiet when they talk about it, and none of us have gone back to that trail since. Something about that day didn't make sense, and none of us can figure out why time felt so different for me compared to everyone else. I guess all I can say is sometimes things happen that don't line up the way they should, and when they do, it's hard to know what to believe. I was driving home late one night, the kind of night where everything feels heavier, quieter, slower, like the world's holding its breath. It had been raining earlier, and by the time I left the restaurant where I'd been working a double shift, thick fog had rolled in. Not the kind where you can barely see the road ahead, but enough to blur the headlights and make everything look like it was underwater. I didn't think much of it, just put the car in gear and started down the old country road that cuts through a patch of farmland outside town. It's a familiar route for me. The road's narrow, 2 lanes with no shoulder, and bordered by fields and woods. There aren't many streetlights out there, so your headlights are the only things cutting through the dark. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Far ahead, headlights were coming toward me, bright and clear in the fog. At first, I relaxed a bit. Some other car, finally. But as the lights got closer, I realized something weird was happening. The car never passed. No matter how long I kept driving, those headlights just stayed on the other side of the road, coming closer, but never close enough to pass me. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was one of those weird optical illusions fog can create. But the headlights stayed there, locked in place on my side of the road. I tried to keep calm, but my heart started pounding. The headlights weren't moving around me like you'd expect if the car was driving by. It was like they were frozen in place, just creeping closer along the shoulder. I flicked on my high beams, hoping to get a better look, but the fog swallowed the light, and the headlights stayed stubbornly in front of me. I pulled over to the side, hands shaking a bit, and waited. The lights got closer, and I swear I caught the vague outline of a car, but every time I blinked or turned my head for a better look, it just faded back into the fog. When the lights were maybe 20 feet from me, I reached for my phone, hoping to call someone or at least flash my own lights, but my phone had no signal. Not surprising out there, but the timing was nerve-wracking. I sat there for a moment, watching the headlights inch closer. Then, out of nowhere, they stopped moving, just stayed there, bright and silent, like a pair of eyes watching me from the fog. I turned the engine off, thinking maybe if I stayed still, the car would pass or disappear. But the lights stayed. I didn't want to look away, but I also didn't want to stare at something I couldn't explain. Finally, I grabbed my keys and stepped out, fog swirling thick around me, damp on my face. I shined my flashlight toward the lights, but there was nothing. No car. No reflection, just the 2 points of bright light hovering in the fog, unmoving. That's when I noticed the tire tracks. They were fresh, running off the side of the road into the field next to me. Deep grooves in the wet dirt, leading away from the road, disappearing into the tall grass. They looked like someone had pulled off the road right there, but I couldn't see a car anywhere. I followed the tracks a few steps, but the fog was thick and the field soggy. My shoes got soaked, and I felt ridiculous standing there in the dark, staring into the empty field. When I turned back to the road, the headlights were gone. No flash of taillights, no engine noise, nothing. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands were still shaking. I thought maybe I was tired, or the fog was messing with my eyes. I turned the engine on and drove slowly down the road, glancing in the mirrors, but there was nothing behind me. No headlights, no car, no sign anyone was out there at all. The tire tracks were still visible in the field when I passed, but no car, no footprints, no indication anyone had been there. The rest of the drive home was quiet. I kept my lights on high beam and checked the mirrors every few minutes, but nothing followed me. No lights, no cars, no sounds. When I pulled into my driveway, I still couldn't shake the feeling I'd been watched. I checked my phone for messages or calls. Nothing. No missed calls, no voicemails. I didn't tell anyone about it. It felt stupid, like something out of a bad movie. But sometimes when I drive that road at night, especially when the fog's thick, I swear I catch a glimpse of those headlights again, just at the edge of the trees, waiting, never quite moving, like they're stuck there, somewhere between here and nowhere. It happened last fall, mid-October, when the weather had cooled off just enough to keep the trails empty. I hike pretty often, just local stuff around southern Oregon, mostly for the exercise, but also because I like being somewhere quiet where I can let the dog off leash. Her name's Tula, a medium-sized mutt, part shepherd maybe. Smart, good recall, doesn't chase wildlife. We've done that trail a dozen times before. She knows the way better than I do. This was in the Umpqua National Forest, a few miles past the usual campground entrances, off a dirt road that gets rutted and muddy this time of year. I parked at a little turnout around 10 a.m., and we set off up a ridge trail that loops for maybe 6 miles and comes back down through a cedar grove. It's not a maintained trail, more of a footpath through the brush, but it's well worn enough to follow. We were about an hour in when it started getting strange. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not just the usual forest quiet, but total silence. No wind, no birds, not even the faint buzz of insects. I only realized how silent it was because I could hear my own breathing so clearly. That kind of quiet just doesn't happen out there. I stopped walking and looked around. Tula had stopped too, a few feet ahead of me. She wasn't sniffing the ground or exploring like usual. She was standing perfectly still, ears up, staring toward the tree canopy. Not a sound from her, not even her usual panting. Then she let out this low, shaky whine, almost like a whimper, and sat down right there in the middle of the path. I walked up next to her and tried to get her moving again, but she wouldn't budge. She just kept staring up, not straight up, but slightly to the left, like she was tracking something. I looked where she was looking, but there was nothing. Just trees and sky. No movement. No sound. I listened hard, thought maybe I'd hear a drone or a plane or something, but it was dead quiet, like someone had hit mute on the whole forest. I crouched next to her and scratched behind her ears. She was shaking a little, still staring up. That's when I realized she wasn't blinking. I waved my hand in front of her eyes, and she finally snapped out of it, turned her head slightly, but didn't stand. I tried tugging her collar gently, coaxing her forward, but she just pulled back and let out another soft whine. I've never seen her act like that, not even when she was a puppy and got spooked by fireworks. At one point, I stepped about 20 feet ahead to see if she'd follow. She stayed put, just sat there, staring up at the same patch of sky. So I walked back, sat with her for a while. That's when I started to feel it too. Not fear exactly, but this pressure. Like something just over the tree line was watching us. I know how that sounds, but I don't know how else to describe it. The feeling you get when someone's behind you in a dark room, even if you can't hear them. It was that. The air felt thick. I don't know if it was the humidity or elevation or what, but I remember my ears popping a little like they do on a plane, and it got at cold. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than it had been a few minutes earlier. I could see my breath just barely. Then, just as suddenly as it started, Tula stood up. She shook herself off and walked over to me, tail low, still acting nervous but moving again. She didn't look back up. I figured maybe there was a cougar nearby and we were just catching its scent or something, so I decided to cut the loop short and take a side trail back toward the car. I didn't feel good about staying out there any longer. We'd gone maybe half a mile down that side path when I noticed something else weird. The shadows. They weren't right. The sun was behind us, low in the sky but still bright, but the shadows from the trees were stretched, like longer than they should have been. I checked my watch. It was just after noon. No way the light angle should have looked like that. Tula kept looking behind us, not stopping, just glancing back every few steps. At one point she stopped and growled. A low, steady growl, not loud, but deep. I turned around expecting to see someone coming up the trail behind us, but there was no one there. Nothing moving, just the trees and those weird long shadows. I picked up a stick just in case, and we kept moving. I tried to calm her down, talking to her like normal, but she wouldn't make eye contact, just kept glancing behind us. When we got closer to the trailhead, I started to feel better. The sounds started coming back. Birds, wind in the branches, normal stuff. Tula relaxed a little. I clipped her leash on before we reached the car. That's when I noticed the time on my phone. It said 3:47 p.m. I know for a fact we weren't out there. We weren't out there that long. We started hiking just after 10. I cut the loop short. Should have taken 2.5 hours tops. But somehow we were missing almost 2 extra hours. I hadn't stopped long enough for that. I hadn't eaten anything, hadn't even taken a break besides sitting with Tula for maybe 10 minutes. It didn't make sense. There were no notifications on my phone either. No service, which isn't unusual out there, but still. The battery hadn't dropped much either, just the time. Wrong by hours. Back at the car, I checked the dash clock. Same time, 3:47. I didn't know what to think. I sat there for a while before starting the engine. Tula climbed in the back and curled up tight like she just wanted to sleep. The drive back was uneventful. No traffic. Just the usual winding roads and logging trucks. But I kept checking the rearview mirror every couple of minutes. I don't know why. That night, Tula wouldn't leave my side. She followed me from room to room, which she's never done. Even slept on the floor next to my bed instead of in the living room. I woke up a few times, thinking I heard something outside. Just faint noises like a low hum or static, but nothing I could pinpoint. The next day, I checked the GPS data from the hiking app I usually use. It had recorded the path, but there was a weird gap in the middle, like it lost signal or something. A straight line cut between 2 points, skipping maybe a mile and a half. No elevation data, no pace recorded during that part. Just blank. I haven't gone back to that trail since. Neither has Tula. Every time we drive past that road, she gets antsy and whines. I don't know what happened out there, but something was off. Way off. I was driving back from my cousin's place in New Mexico, heading north toward Colorado. I'd left late, around 9:30, figuring I'd rather deal with the empty roads at night than the heat and traffic during the day. The stretch I was on cut through open desert and flat scrubland, barely lit by anything besides my headlights and the occasional distant glow from a farmhouse or small town. I'd done this drive before, and it was usually pretty relaxing. Around midnight, I was maybe an hour past Santa Rosa on a back road that eventually connects to I-25. No other cars for miles, just me and the hum of the tires. I had the windows cracked because the night air felt good, and there was a clear sky full of stars. I remember thinking it looked especially sharp that night, like the sky had more depth than usual. I stopped at a little pull-off to stretch my legs and take a leak. No streetlights out there, so the only light was the dome light inside the truck and the stars overhead. After I got out, I just stood there for a bit, leaning against the hood, letting my eyes adjust and listening to the quiet. You get a kind of stillness out there that doesn't exist in cities. No bugs, no wind, no trees rustling, just dead quiet. I noticed the stars directly above me seemed unusually bright. Not in a dramatic way, just off, like they had a sharper outline than normal. I figured maybe it was the elevation or the lack of light pollution. I watched them while I finished a bottle of water, just standing there with the truck engine ticking as it cooled. Then I noticed something weird. Some of the stars, 3 or 4 of them, were slightly out of sync with the rest of the sky. Not blinking or flashing, just moving. Barely. Slowly. I thought maybe it was my eyes playing tricks, so I looked away for a second, then back. Still there. These points of light were very subtly shifting. At first I thought maybe satellites, but they weren't crossing the sky the way satellites usually do. They weren't following a straight path. They were sort of drifting together, maintaining their distance from each other, but shifting as a group, like a constellation sliding sideways. It creeped me out a little, but I still wasn't alarmed. I figured it was just something atmospheric or maybe high-altitude aircraft reflecting light weird. I got back in the truck and kept driving. About 15 minutes later, I noticed the same cluster of lights again. I didn't remember them being in that position before. They were to my left now, a bit ahead of me, like they'd moved across the sky. And again, they were drifting slightly, still grouped tight together, still out of sync with everything else. This time I kept glancing at them as I drove. I turned down the music so I could focus. There was a low pressure in my ears, like before a storm, but the sky looked totally clear. I cracked the window wider and listened. Nothing. No wind. No bugs. No coyotes. Just the road under my tires and that faint pressure in my head. After another couple miles, the lights started to fade a bit, like clouds were moving in. But I couldn't see any actual clouds. The stars around them stayed just as bright. Only the shifting ones dulled. I slowed down without really thinking, maybe down to 45. Something about the lights was bothering me now in a way I couldn't explain. I started to get the feeling I was being followed, even though they were ahead of me. I pulled over again and shut off the engine completely. I stepped out and looked straight up. The lights weren't ahead anymore, they were directly overhead. And this was the part that really unsettled me. The stars weren't moving anymore because I wasn't moving. They'd only seemed to shift because I was driving, and then they were staying exactly above me, matching my speed. When I stopped, they stopped. I stayed still for a long time, just staring. Now that I wasn't in motion, I could see it more clearly. The lights weren't separate points. They were part of something, a shape. Something massive and dark that blended perfectly with the night sky. It had no lights of its own, no outline, no sound, just that patch of sky where no stars shone except for those few dim drifting ones. I crouched down by the door, not hiding exactly, but feeling exposed. I don't know how to explain it, but I started to feel watched. Not threatened exactly, just studied. Observed. I stayed there maybe 5 or 6 minutes. The shape didn't move. No wind, no noise, just that pressure in the air and that silent shape overhead. Eventually, I forced myself back into the truck and started driving again, slowly. After about a mile, I looked up. The lights had shifted slightly again, still above me, but now angling off to the right, like they were circling away. Then they disappeared. Not gradually, just gone, like someone had turned off a projector. The pressure in my ears vanished at the same time, and I realized I could hear normal night sounds again. Crickets, wind, the faint yipping of coyotes in the distance. Everything snapped back to normal. I kept driving, faster now, not really caring about speed limits. I didn't stop again until I hit the main highway and started seeing more cars. I didn't see anything else unusual the rest of the night, but I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see those lights again. When I finally got home, I checked the GPS history on my phone just out of curiosity. The timeline skipped over about 15 minutes between when I pulled over the second time and when I started driving again. No location logged. Like the phone had been offline. I didn't notice any time I'm missing while it happened, but the gap was there. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. I wasn't even sure what I'd seen, and I didn't want to hear the usual explanations. Drones, satellites, weather balloons. I've seen all those before, and this wasn't any of them. It was big, silent, high up, but not as high as stars. It moved like it was attached to me somehow, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. And whatever it was, it left without a trace. I was out on the lake early one morning, trying to get some fishing done before the heat kicked in. It was just me, my small boat, and the usual quiet you get before the world wakes up. The water was calm, the sky mostly clear with just a few clouds drifting east. I'd been out there a couple hours already, and honestly, it was a pretty slow morning. No bites, no movement besides the occasional ripple from the wind. That's when I noticed it. The wind just stopped. Not a breeze, not a shift, just dead still. The water flattened out like glass, which was weird because there had been a steady breeze coming across the lake for the last couple hours. It didn't make sense for it to just cut out like that, especially so suddenly. I looked around, kind of expecting something to explain it, but nothing. No storm clouds, no distant thunder, no planes or anything like that. Just this strange, heavy silence. Then I saw the birds. Normally in the morning, they're scattered all over, perching, flying in different directions, chasing bugs. But now, every single bird in the area was circling tight, real tight, like they were stuck in this weird spiral right above the water. I mean, I counted at least 20, maybe 30 of them, all swirling like they were drawn to some invisible center. I stared up, and that's when I noticed the shape. It was dark, like a big blotch in the sky, but it wasn't like a cloud. It was hazy, sort of like smoke, but without any smell or movement. The weird part was that it didn't reflect any light. You know how even clouds catch sunlight and glow a little on the edges? This thing didn't. It just sat there, a flat, dark mass against the sky, and it didn't cast a shadow on the water below. I kept squinting, trying to figure out what it was. At first, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light, or some kind of shadow from a big storm far off, but the rest of the sky was bright and clear. The sun was just coming up behind it, and the light seemed to pass right through the edges without changing the shape or color. The birds kept circling, tighter and tighter. Their calls were all around me now, sharp, frantic, but there was no panic in them, more like they were stuck in a pattern they couldn't break. I tried to get my phone out to record it, but as soon as I touched it, the screen flickered and went black. Battery dead, which was weird because I'd charged it fully the night before. I pulled it out again, but nothing. No amount of pressing the power button brought it back on. I was still staring up at that shape when I noticed another thing. No insects. Usually, on warm mornings by the water, you get bugs buzzing or landing on your skin. But there was nothing. No mosquitoes, no flies, nothing. I figured maybe I was just out in the middle of a patch with fewer bugs, so I looked down at the water. Even the usual birds that skim the surface weren't moving in or out of the lake. It was like everything had stopped except those circling birds. I started to feel kind of uneasy, but tried to keep it together. I'd been on the lake plenty of times and seen weird weather and bird behavior before. Still, this was different. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or freak myself out. After maybe 10 minutes, the shape didn't move. It just stayed there, hanging in the sky like a bruise. The birds kept circling and the wind was still gone. Then, gradually, the birds began to break formation, peeling off one by one. The wind started to pick up again, barely at first, and the water rippled back to life. I watched the dark shape as the breeze grew, and then it started to fade, like someone turned down a dimmer switch. It dissolved slowly into nothing, the edges blurring until it was gone. The birds scattered, flying off in different directions, and the air smelled normal again. I checked my phone, and after a minute, it finally came back on. Battery at 10%, which was strange because it had been fully charged hours earlier. I didn't catch a picture or video. My hands were shaking too much, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to focus on. I packed up and started heading back to shore, feeling the normal sounds and smells of the morning return. The rest of the day, I kept thinking about what I saw. When I told a friend who fishes a lot, he said maybe it was some kind of weather phenomenon or a shadow from a plane or drone, but nothing he'd ever heard of acted like that. Completely black, no shadow, no reflection, and birds reacting like that. A couple nights later, I told my brother about it, and he asked if I'd been dreaming or had any drinks before I went out. I hadn't. I just know what I saw was real, but I don't know what it was. I checked the weather reports for that day and the following days. No storms, no atmospheric anomalies. Nothing that matched what I saw on the lake. Sometimes when I'm out fishing now, I keep an eye on the sky, but I haven't seen anything like that since. The birds act normal again. The wind blows like it's supposed to. But every so often, especially on still mornings, I find myself looking up, half expecting that dark shape to show up again, circling above the water, quiet and impossible to explain. We set up camp just after dusk in this little clearing about 2 miles off the main trail. It was me and 3 friends, Mike, Jen, and Dave, just a quick weekend getaway to get away from the city noise. Nothing fancy. We picked this spot because it was open enough to pitch the tents, but surrounded by thick woods, so we figured we'd get some privacy. The first few hours were normal. We built a fire, grilled some burgers, drank a couple of beers. It was cool out, early fall, crisp air, the usual crackling fire sounds, some crickets in the background. We told stories, laughed a bit, then started to wind down around 10:30. I was the last one to crawl into my sleeping bag inside my tent. The others had theirs set up nearby, just a few yards apart. The forest was quiet, dark except for the fire's fading glow and a sliver of moonlight. I was just drifting off when I noticed something strange. There was this clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on a glass bottle, only more deliberate, rhythmic. It was soft but clear enough to cut through the quiet. At first, I thought maybe one of the guys was messing around or some kind of insect, but the pattern was too steady, like a slow metronome ticking in the dark. I pulled back the tent flap a bit and shone my flashlight outside. The fire was dead by now, just embers glowing. I didn't see anyone. The woods were still. No animals, no movement. I woke Mike up and asked if he heard it. He was quiet for a minute, then nodded. Jen and Dave were awake too, all of us suddenly alert. We all stepped outside, flashlights sweeping the tree line. The noise stopped as soon as we moved, like it vanished into the night. We looked around for anything. A woodpecker maybe, or some kind of critter, but nothing. Just trees and shadows. Probably just some weird animal, Mike said, but none of us sounded convinced. We went back inside the tents, doors zipped up tight. 10 minutes later, the clicking started again. Same pattern, same slow rhythm. Except this time it sounded like it was moving, circling the tents. Around and around, slow and steady. I swear, you could almost track it if you tried. Like it was walking a path just beyond the tree line, keeping pace. Every now and then it paused, then picked up again. We all stayed silent, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it was close enough to be unsettling. Not right next to the tent, but near enough to make you wonder if something was watching. After maybe 15 minutes, Jen said, "I'm going outside to check." Nobody stopped her. She unzipped her tent and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The clicking stopped immediately. "Nothing here," she said, voice low, shining her light into the woods. No animals, no movement. We stayed out there for a few more minutes, walking a small circle around the campsite. It was dead silent except for the rustle of leaves underfoot. Finally, we went back in. The tents zipped up. We kept talking softly for a bit, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Then it stopped. For the next hour, nothing. No sounds, no movement. We relaxed, thought maybe it was just a one-off thing, some animal wandering by or a weird echo. But then, right as we were drifting back to sleep, the clicking came back. Same rhythm, same slow circle. It was like the sound had a mind of its own, appearing only when it wanted. This time, it felt different. Closer. More deliberate. Like something was pacing us, but not stepping on twigs or leaves. Just that steady tapping, almost mechanical. We lay there frozen, listening. I could hear Dave's breathing quicken in the tent next to me. After a while, Mike whispered, "We should check again." I didn't want to, but I nodded. We all slipped out, flashlights on, scanning the trees. The clicking stopped again the second we moved. We searched for a while, but it was like chasing a ghost. No footprints, no animals, no signs of anything. Just that eerie silence. We got back inside and agreed to keep our phones close. None of us wanted to admit how weird it felt. Over the next hour, the clicking came and went a few more times, always stopping the moment we moved or turned on a light. At one point, I looked at my watch. I swear, an hour had passed, but the night felt heavier, slower, like time was dragging or stretching. By 4 a.m., the noise finally stopped for good. We didn't sleep much after that. Too alert, too on edge. In the morning, we packed up quickly. We didn't talk much about it, just agreed maybe it was some weird animal or the forest playing tricks. Back home, I kept thinking about that sound. How it moved around us, but stayed just out of reach. How it stopped whenever we tried to find it. I still don't know what it was. None of us do. It wasn't a bird, not a woodpecker. It wasn't a person or another camper. Nothing left tracks or signs. Just that clicking, like something circling, watching, but never close enough to see.